The richest man in Dry Creek Valley had everything, except the truth. Ethan Hale built an empire on silence and steel, burying his grief beneath cattle and coin. For 7 years, he believed his wife drowned in the Devil's Fork River. For 7 years, he never looked back. Then one Sunday afternoon, his son whispered 4 words that shattered everything. "Father, that's my mother." The beggar woman sitting in the dirt wasn't supposed to exist. She wasn't supposed to remember. And Ethan Hale wasn't supposed to care. But some ghosts don't stay buried, and some love refuses to die. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. The sun hung low over Dry Creek Valley like a copper coin pressed against the sky, casting long shadows across the dusty main street where Ethan Hale walked with the measured pace of a man who owned everything he touched. His boots struck the wooden boardwalk with the rhythmic certainty of a clock, each step deliberate, each movement controlled. Beside him, his 7-year-old son Luke hurried to keep up, his small hand gripping his father's calloused palm. Ethan didn't smile much anymore. Some folks in town said he never had, even before the flood. But those who remembered the man he'd been, back when Elena was alive, back when laughter occasionally broke through his stern exterior, they knew different. They knew the river had taken more than his wife. It had taken whatever soft parts remained in Ethan Hale and left only iron. "Keep up, Luke," Ethan said without looking down, his voice carrying that flat, emotionless tone that made ranch hands straighten their spines and auction sellers lower their prices. "We've got business at the feed store, then home before dark." "Yes, sir," Luke murmured, his legs pumping faster. The boy had his mother's eyes, deep brown with flecks of gold that caught the light, though Ethan rarely allowed himself to notice. Looking at Luke meant remembering Elena, and remembering Elena meant touching a wound that had never properly healed, just scarred over with time and deliberate forgetting. Dry Creek Valley on a Sunday afternoon was a study in small-town ritual. The church had let out an hour ago, and families clustered in small groups along the street, their Sunday best already gathering dust from the perpetual wind that swept down from the mountains. Women in faded calico dresses fanned themselves against the heat, while men in clean shirts and suspenders discussed cattle prices and the weather with the serious attention such matters deserved in ranching country. "Mr. Hale," nodded Samuel Pierce, tipping his hat as Ethan passed. Pierce ran the general store and served on the town council, which meant he considered himself important enough to warrant Ethan's acknowledgement. Ethan returned the nod with mechanical precision. "Pierce." No conversation followed. That was how Ethan preferred it. Since Elena's death, he'd systematically removed himself from the social fabric of Dry Creek Valley, maintaining only those connections absolutely necessary for business. He attended town meetings when ranch interests required it, dealt fairly with merchants, paid his bills on time, and kept his distance from everything else, especially anything that might crack the careful walls he'd built around his grief. The Hale Ranch sprawled across 15,000 acres of prime grazing land, with water rights that made other ranchers green with envy, and enough cattle to feed half the territory. Ethan had inherited a modest operation from his father and built it into something people talked about in Denver and Kansas City. He ran it with the precision of a military campaign. Every fence post accounted for, every head of cattle tracked, every dollar measured against profit margins that would make a banker weep with joy. Numbers made sense. Numbers didn't leave. Numbers didn't drown in swollen rivers while their husbands worked late in the north pasture, too focused on spring branding to notice the storm rolling in. "Father?" Luke's voice pulled him back to the present. "What is it?" "Can we get peppermint sticks?" Mrs. Henderson said she got new ones in. Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Elena used to buy Luke peppermint sticks every Sunday, making it a ritual, a small joy in the boy's week. After she died, Ethan had continued the tradition for exactly 3 weeks before stopping abruptly, recognizing it for what it was, a connection to a past he needed to sever. "No," he said simply. "Sugar rots your teeth." Luke's face fell, but he didn't argue. The boy had learned early not to push his father, not to ask for stories about his mother, not to cry when nightmares woke him. At 7 years old, Luke Hale was already learning to build his own walls. And Ethan told himself this was good, this was necessary, this was how you survived in a world that took things from you. They passed the telegraph office, the barber shop, the Lucky Dollar Saloon, with its doors propped open to release the smell of whiskey and tobacco smoke. Ethan kept his eyes forward, his destination fixed, his purpose clear. Get the supplies ordered at the feed store, pick up the mail, return to the ranch. Simple, controlled, safe. Then Luke stopped walking. The boy's hand went rigid in Ethan's grip, his small body freezing mid-step like a bird dog catching a scent. Ethan felt the resistance and turned, irritation flickering across his features. "Luke, I said keep—" But the words died in his throat when he saw his son's face. Luke had gone pale beneath his summer tan, his eyes fixed on something across the street with an intensity that was utterly unlike him. The boy's mouth had fallen open slightly, and his breathing had gone shallow and quick. "Luke?" Ethan's voice sharpened with concern. "What's wrong?" The boy didn't answer. Couldn't answer, it seemed. He just stood there, staring, his small hand trembling in his father's grip. Ethan followed his son's gaze. Across the dusty street, in the narrow gap between Henderson's general store and the old trading post that had been abandoned for years, sat a woman. She was thin, too thin, wrapped in layers of mismatched fabric that might have been clothing or might have been rags. It was hard to tell. Her hair hung in matted tangles around a face turned downward, focused on something in her lap. She was humming. Ethan could just barely hear it over the general noise of the street, a soft, tuneless melody that seemed to drift and fade like smoke. "Just a drifter," Ethan said, his voice returning to its usual flat certainty. "Town gets them sometimes. Come on." He tugged Luke's hand, but the boy didn't move. "Luke." "Father," Luke whispered, and something in his voice made the hair on the back of Ethan's neck stand up. It wasn't fear exactly, or surprise, but something deeper and more unsettling. Recognition. "That's my mother." The words landed like a physical blow, stealing the air from Ethan's lungs. For a moment, just a heartbeat, the world seemed to tilt sideways, reality shifting in a way that made no sense. Then fury and pain and something close to panic surged through him in equal measure. "No," Ethan said, the word coming out harder than he intended. "No, Luke, that's not— Your mother is dead, you know that." "But, Father," I said no. Ethan's voice had gone cold now, the tone that ended conversations and sent ranch hands scurrying. "Your mother drowned 7 years ago. You were barely a year old. You don't even remember her." "I do remember," Luke insisted, and there was something in the boy's certainty that was worse than any tantrum or argument. "I remember her singing, like that, and she had a doll. She always had a doll." Ethan's eyes snapped back to the woman across the street, and his stomach dropped. There, clutched in her thin hands, dirty and worn but unmistakable, was a cloth doll. The woman was turning it over and over in her fingers, humming that soft, tuneless melody, completely unaware of being watched. "Coincidence," Ethan said, but his voice had lost its conviction. "Lots of women have dolls. Luke, you can't—" But Luke had pulled free from his grip and was walking across the street, drawn toward the woman like a compass needle to north. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest as he hurried after his son, his mind racing through impossible calculations, trying to make sense of something that couldn't make sense. Elena was dead. He'd searched for 3 days after the flood, riding up and down the Devil's Fork River until his horse went lame and his hands bled from clinging to rocks and branches. He'd found her shawl snagged on a fallen tree 5 miles downstream. He'd found one of her shoes. The sheriff had declared her dead after a week. The whole town had attended the memorial service. Dead. Gone. Buried in memory, if not in body. But Luke was kneeling now in the dirt beside the woman, his small face tilted up toward hers with an expression of such hope and longing that it physically hurt Ethan to see it. "Ma?" Luke whispered. The woman looked up. Ethan's world stopped. The face was wrong, weathered and lined in ways Elena's had never been, aged beyond what 7 years should have accomplished. The eyes were different too, distant and unfocused, holding none of Elena's sharp intelligence and quick wit. But the bone structure, the shape of the jaw, the way her left eyebrow arched slightly higher than her right. "No," Ethan said again, but this time it was a prayer more than a statement. "It's not possible." The woman stared at Luke with those distant eyes, her humming trailing off into silence. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, almost mechanically, she reached out and touched Luke's cheek with trembling fingers. "Small," she murmured, her voice rough and uncertain, as if she'd forgotten how to use it properly. "So small." Luke's eyes filled with tears. "Ma, it's me. It's Luke." The woman's face showed no comprehension, no flash of recognition, but her hand remained on Luke's cheek, gentle despite its trembling, and she began humming again, that same soft, tuneless melody. Ethan stood frozen, caught between the impulse to grab his son and run, and the slowly dawning, impossible horror that Luke might be right. He forced himself to look, really look, at the woman before him. There, on her left forearm, just visible beneath the torn sleeve, was a scar. A curved, distinctive mark from where Elena had been kicked by a Greenbroke horse the summer before they married. Ethan had kissed that scar 1,000 times. There, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear with her left hand, even though the hair was too matted to stay. Elena had done that same thing whenever she was nervous or thinking. There, the tilt of her head when she looked at Luke, a gesture so familiar it made Ethan's chest constrict. "Elena?" His voice came out broken, barely more than a whisper. The woman didn't react to the name, didn't turn to him or show any sign she'd heard. She just kept humming, her fingers still resting against Luke's tear-stained cheek. A crowd was gathering. Ethan could feel eyes on them, hear the whispered conversations starting up around them. Sarah Henderson stood in the doorway of her store, one hand pressed to her mouth. Samuel Pierce had stopped mid-stride on the boardwalk, his face a study in shock. Within minutes, the whole town would be talking. "Sir?" A hesitant voice came from behind him. Ethan turned to find Deputy Marshal Tom Crawford approaching, his young face uncertain. "Is there a problem here?" "No," Ethan said automatically, then stopped. "Was there a problem? What did you call it when your dead wife appeared as a broken beggar on the streets of your town?" "I don't know." Crawford looked at the woman, then at Luke, kneeling beside her, then back at Ethan. "Do you know this woman, Mr. Hale?" Ethan's mind raced. What did he know? What could he claim without sounding insane? "I need to speak with her, alone." "She's been around town for about 3 weeks," Crawford offered, trying to be helpful. "Mostly keeps to herself, doesn't beg or cause trouble. Few folks have given her food, but she doesn't really talk much. Seems, well, touched in the head, if you'll pardon me saying so." 3 weeks. She'd been here for 3 weeks, and Ethan had never noticed. But then, he never came to town on Sundays. He never lingered on the streets. He never looked at the drifters and beggars who sometimes passed through Dry Creek Valley. He'd made himself blind to anything that might require emotional engagement. "Luke," Ethan said, his voice tight. "Step back." "But Father, now." Reluctantly, Luke pulled away from the woman's touch. Her hand dropped to her lap, returning to the doll, and she resumed her humming as if they'd never been there at all. Ethan knelt down, bringing himself level with her down-turned face. Up close, he could see the dirt ground into her skin, the hollowness of her cheeks, the way her clothes hung on a frame that had lost too much weight. But he could also see the shape of her nose, the curve of her lips, the small mole at the base of her throat that Elena had always been self-conscious about. "Elena," he said again, more firmly this time. "Elena, look at me." She didn't respond, just kept humming, kept turning the doll over in her hands. "Can you hear me? Do you understand what I'm saying?" Nothing. Ethan reached out slowly, carefully, and touched her shoulder. She flinched, a small, frightened movement, but didn't pull away. Her humming stuttered, stopped, then started again in a different key. "Where have you been?" The question escaped before he could stop it, his voice cracking on the last word. "Where have you been?" The woman's eyes lifted to his face for just a moment, and Ethan found himself staring into a stranger's gaze. There was no recognition there, no Elena, just a vast empty confusion that made his heart break all over again. But then she spoke, just 2 words, so soft he almost missed them. "The river." Ethan's hands began to shake. Behind him, He could hear Luke's quick breathing, could feel the weight of the town's attention pressing down on them all. This was impossible. This was insane. Elena had drowned 7 years ago. He'd mourned her. He'd built his entire life around the fact of her absence, but the evidence sat before him, humming and broken, but alive. "We need to get her to Doc Pritchard," Crawford said, his voice carefully neutral. "Get her checked over, see if—" "No," Ethan interrupted. "Not yet. Mr. Hale, with all due respect, she needs medical attention. Look at her." Ethan was looking. He couldn't stop looking. 7 years of carefully maintained control were crumbling, and he didn't know how to stop it, didn't know how to process what was happening. "I'll take care of it," he heard himself say. If she's who I think she is, she's my responsibility." "And who do you think she is?" Ethan stood, his legs unsteady beneath him. The crowd had grown larger, pressing in with that terrible small-town curiosity that demanded answers, demanded explanations, demanded that everything make sense according to the rules they all understood. "My wife," he said, and the words seemed to echo in the sudden silence. "I think she's my wife." The murmur that ran through the crowd was like wind through dry grass, shocked, disbelieving, hungry for more. Sarah Henderson gasped audibly. Samuel Pierce's face went slack with amazement. Even Crawford took a step back, his professional composure cracking. "Your wife's been dead for 7 years, someone said from the crowd. "I know," Ethan replied, not taking his eyes off the woman. "I know." He knew what this looked like. He knew how it sounded. A rich rancher claiming a mad beggar as his long-dead wife. The town would think he'd lost his mind. They'd talk about it for years, make it into a legend, a cautionary tale about the dangers of grief and isolation. And they might be right. Maybe he had lost his mind. Maybe grief had finally caught up with him after 7 years of running, manifesting as this impossible delusion. But Luke was holding his hand again, squeezing tight, and the hope in his son's face was real. The scar on the woman's arm was real. The way she hummed was real. "Luke," Ethan said quietly, "go to the feed store and tell Mr. Patterson to have our order delivered to the ranch. Then wait there for me." "But do it." When Luke hesitated, Ethan added more gently, "Please, son, I need to handle this." Luke looked at the woman one more time, his young face struggling with emotions too big for his small body, then nodded and ran off toward the feed store. Ethan watched him go, then turned back to Crawford. "I'm taking her home," he said. It wasn't a request. "Mr. Hale, you can't just—" "Can't what? Take a woman who might be my wife to my own ranch? Try to help her?" Ethan's voice hardened. "Unless you're planning to arrest her for vagrancy, Marshal, I suggest you let me do what needs doing." Crawford's face flushed, but he was young enough and inexperienced enough to back down in the face of Ethan's certainty. "Fine. But Doc Pritchard should see her, today. I'll bring her by tomorrow." "Today, Mr. Hale." Ethan met the marshal's eyes and saw the steel beneath the youth. Crawford might be green, but he took his duty seriously. "Fine. This evening, after I get her cleaned up and fed." The marshal nodded, satisfied with this compromise, and turned to disperse the crowd. "All right, folks, show's over. Move along now." But Ethan knew it wasn't over. It was just beginning. The story would spread through Dry Creek Valley like wildfire. Ethan Hale and his ghost wife returned from the dead, but broken in mind. By nightfall, every rancher, merchant, and ranch hand within 50 miles would have heard some version of it. He'd spent 7 years carefully constructing a life of control and isolation. In the space of 5 minutes, it had all come apart. Ethan knelt down again, this time offering his hand to the woman. "Can you stand? Can you walk?" She looked at his hand with that distant, confused expression, then slowly reached out and took it. Her grip was weak, her palm rough with calluses and scars, but the touch sent electricity through him nonetheless. He helped her to her feet. She was lighter than she should be, fragile in a way that made him angry at himself for reasons he couldn't quite name, and steadied her when she swayed. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's get you home." She clutched the doll to her chest with her free hand and let him lead her, docile as a child, trusting in a way that was heartbreaking given how little she seemed to understand of what was happening. Ethan's wagon was at the end of the street, and the walk there felt like miles. People stared from doorways and windows, their conversations falling silent as he passed. He kept his eyes forward, his jaw set, refusing to acknowledge the attention even as it burned against his skin. Luke was waiting at the feed store as instructed, his small face anxious. When he saw them coming, he ran to meet them. "Is she really Ma?" he asked, his voice small and scared. "I don't know yet," Ethan answered honestly. "But we're going to find out." He helped the woman, Elena, or whoever she was, into the back of the wagon, settling her on some empty feed sacks to make her more comfortable. She didn't resist, didn't question, just sat where he placed her and resumed her humming, that soft, tuneless melody that was starting to embed itself in Ethan's brain. Luke climbed up beside his father on the driver's seat and Ethan took up the reins. The ride back to the ranch would take an hour, plenty of time to think, to question, to doubt everything that was happening. But as he guided the horses through town and onto the road that led home, Ethan found his mind strangely quiet. The shock was setting in, creating a kind of numb detachment that made everything feel unreal, like a dream he might wake from at any moment. He glanced back at the woman. She was watching the landscape pass with those empty eyes, still clutching the doll, still humming. Whatever had happened to her, in the river, after the river, during the 7 years she'd been gone, it had hollowed her out, leaving only fragments of the person she'd been. If she was Elena. If. The doubt was necessary, Ethan told himself. Jumping to conclusions would be foolish. There would need to be proof, verification, some way to be certain beyond the scar and the gestures and the terrible, impossible hope that was blooming in his chest despite his best efforts to crush it. "Father?" Luke's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Yes?" "Do you remember Ma's singing?" Ethan's throat tightened. "Yes." "She used to sing me to sleep, before the river." "I remember." Luke was quiet for a moment, then asked the question Ethan had been dreading. What if it really is her? What if she came back? What if indeed? Ethan had no answer for that. He'd built his entire existence around her absence, around the necessity of moving forward without her. The ranch, his wealth, his carefully maintained isolation, all of it was predicated on the fact that Elena was gone and never coming back. If she had come back, if this broken woman in his wagon was truly his wife, then everything he'd told himself for 7 years was a lie. The grief he'd transformed into ambition, the love he'd channeled into expansion and acquisition, the guilt he'd buried beneath success, all of it would have been wasted, misdirected, a monument to his own failure. Because if Elena had survived, if she'd been alive all this time, then Ethan had stopped searching too soon. He'd given up. He'd mourned and moved on while she was out there somewhere, lost and alone and slowly losing her mind. The possibility was almost too terrible to contemplate. "Father?" Luke prompted, still waiting for an answer. "Then we'll deal with it," Ethan said finally, his voice rough. "Whatever happens, we'll deal with it." It wasn't much of an answer, but it was all he had. The ranch house came into view as they crested the final hill, a sprawling 2-story structure of wood and stone that Ethan had expanded twice over the years, making it more mansion than homestead. Elena had loved this house, had helped design the original addition. She'd wanted big windows to let in light, a wraparound porch for summer evenings, a kitchen large enough to feed a small army. Ethan had given her all of it, and after she died, he'd given her more, building and expanding as if square footage could somehow make up for her absence. Now, bringing this woman, this possible ghost, back to the home they'd shared, Ethan felt something close to fear. What if being here triggered memories? What if it broke her further? What if it proved beyond doubt that she wasn't Elena at all, just some unfortunate woman who happened to share certain features? He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house, and his ranch foreman, Tom Yates, came out to meet them. Tom had been with Ethan for 12 years, had known Elena, had helped search the river after the flood. Now his weathered face went pale as he caught sight of the woman in the wagon. "Boss?" His voice was uncertain, questioning. "Help me get her inside," Ethan said, not offering explanations. There would be time for that later. Tom moved to comply without further questions. That was one of the things Ethan appreciated about him, and together they helped the woman down from the wagon. She allowed it all passively, still humming, still clutching the doll. "Get Maria to run a bath," Ethan instructed, "and find some clean clothes." Maria Rodriguez was the housekeeper, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd been running the household since Elena's death. She appeared in the doorway now, drawn by the commotion, and her eyes went wide when she saw who Ethan was leading into the house. "Dios mío," she whispered, crossing herself. "Is that—" "I don't know yet," Ethan cut her off. "But she needs help. A bath, food, clean clothes. Can you manage that?" Maria nodded slowly, her professional demeanor reasserting itself. "Of course, senor. Come, miss. Come with me." But when Maria tried to take the woman's arm, she flinched back, a sound of distress escaping her throat. The humming stopped entirely, replaced by rapid, frightened breathing. "It's all right," Luke said, moving forward. "She's here to help. She's nice." The woman looked at Luke, and something in her eyes softened. Slowly, hesitantly, she allowed Maria to lead her toward the stairs, though she kept looking back at the boy as if afraid he might disappear. When they were gone, Tom turned to Ethan with questions written all over his face. "Not now," Ethan said before the foreman could speak. "Just not now." Tom nodded and headed back outside, leaving Ethan alone in the front hall with Luke. The boy was staring up the stairs where the woman had disappeared, his small hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Is it wrong?" Luke asked quietly. "To hope?" Ethan wanted to say yes. Hope was dangerous. Hope led to disappointment and pain. Hope made you vulnerable in ways that could destroy you. But looking at his son's face, at the fragile, desperate need there, Ethan couldn't bring himself to extinguish it. "No," he said instead, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not wrong. Even if it kills us both," he added silently. Luke nodded and ran upstairs, probably to hover near wherever Maria had taken the woman. Ethan watched him go, then walked to his study and closed the door. The room was exactly as he'd left it that morning. Ledgers stacked neatly on the desk, maps of his property on the walls, a decanter of whiskey catching the afternoon light. This was where he ran his empire, where he made the decisions that affected hundreds of lives and thousands of cattle. This was his sanctuary of order and control. He poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey and drank it down in one swallow, welcoming the burn. Then he sank into his chair and let his head fall into his hands. For 7 years, Ethan had told himself that he'd done everything possible, that he'd searched until there was nothing left to search for, that accepting Elena's death had been the rational, necessary thing to do. But sitting in his study with a woman who might be his wife upstairs in his house, those certainties were crumbling like sandcastles before the tide. What if he'd given up too soon? What if one more day of searching, one more mile along the river, would have found her? What if his grief had made him weak when he should have been strong? The questions circled in his mind like vultures, and there were no good answers. Only the terrible possibility that his greatest failure hadn't been losing Elena to the river. It had been stopping looking for her. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his spiral. "Come in." Maria entered, her face troubled. "Senor, she is clean now and resting, but—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I think you should know she has scars, many scars. Some very old, some newer. And she is too thin, much too thin." Ethan's hands clenched into fists on the desk. "What kind of scars?" "From injuries, falls, maybe, cuts, one that looks like a burn on her shoulder." Maria's eyes were sad. "She has suffered, senor. Whoever she is, she has suffered greatly." The image of Elena, his Elena, strong and vibrant and full of life, reduced to a scarred, broken woman clutching a doll, was almost more than Ethan could bear. "Is she eating?" "A little. Luke is sitting with her. She seems calmer with him near." Of course she did. Even broken, even lost in whatever darkness had claimed her mind, something in her recognized the boy, responded to him in ways she didn't respond to anyone else. "I need to take her to Doc Pritchard this evening," Ethan said. The marshal insisted. Maria nodded. "That is good. She needs medical attention, senor. Whatever has happened to her, a doctor should examine her." After Maria left, Ethan sat alone with his thoughts and his whiskey for a long time. Outside his window, the sun continued its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. On a normal Sunday, he'd be reviewing the week's accounts now, planning the next week's work, existing in the comfortable routine he'd established. But nothing about this Sunday was normal. Finally, as the light began to fade, Ethan forced himself to his feet and climbed the stairs to the guest room where Maria had settled the woman. The door was half open, and he could see Luke sitting on the floor beside the bed, talking quietly. "And Father says I can learn to rope next year, when I'm bigger. I'll be 8 then. Do you think that's old enough?" Father learned when he was 7, but he says times were different then. Ethan pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The woman, clean now, dressed in one of Maria's spare dresses, her hair combed and braided, lay on the bed, watching Luke with those distant eyes. She'd set the doll on the pillow beside her, positioned carefully as if it might break. She looked more like Elena now. Without the layers of dirt and grime, the shape of her face was clearer, the resemblance harder to deny. But the emptiness in her gaze, the absence of recognition, that was all wrong. "Luke," Ethan said gently, "give us a minute." The boy looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Ethan's expression stopped him. He nodded and slipped past his father into the hall. Ethan approached the bed slowly, carefully, as if dealing with a skittish horse. The woman tracked his movement but showed no fear, no recognition, nothing but that same bland confusion that seemed to be her permanent state. "Can you understand me?" he asked, keeping his voice low and calm. No response. "I'm going to ask you some questions. If you can answer any of them, even one, it would help me understand what happened to you." Nothing. Ethan tried a different approach. "What's your name?" The woman blinked at him, and for a moment he thought she might actually answer. Her lips moved, forming shapes without sound, and her brow furrowed with effort. But then the effort seemed to exhaust her, and she turned her face away, reaching for the doll. "Elena," Ethan tried, watching for any reaction. "Elena Hale. Is that your name?" Still nothing. He went through a litany of questions. Where had she been? How had she survived? Did she remember anything about her life before? But received no answers, no indication that she understood or even heard him. It was like talking to a ghost, insubstantial and unreachable. Finally, frustrated and heartbroken in equal measure, Ethan sank into the chair beside the bed and just looked at her. Really looked, cataloging every familiar feature and every terrible change. The scar on her arm, definitely the one from the horse. The mole at her throat, in exactly the right place. The shape of her hands, Elena's hands, though thinner now, more worn. The way she breathed, the curve of her shoulder, the set of her jaw when she was anxious. All Elena, all heartbreakingly familiar. But the eyes were wrong. Elena's eyes had been alive with intelligence and humor, always thinking, always engaged with the world around her. These eyes were empty windows to an empty house. "What did the river do to you?" Ethan whispered, and he wasn't sure if he was talking to the woman or to the memory of his wife. She turned back to face him then, and for just a second, so brief he might have imagined it, something flickered in those empty eyes. A spark of awareness, of presence, there and gone so fast he couldn't be sure it had happened at all. "The river," she murmured, her voice so soft he had to lean closer to hear. "The water was so cold." Ethan's breath caught. Those were the first coherent words she'd spoken since the disaster on the street. "What else? What else do you remember?" But the moment was gone. Her eyes went distant again, and she began humming that tuneless melody, retreating into whatever safe place her mind had found to hide from the world. Ethan sat back, his heart pounding. It wasn't proof. It wasn't enough to be certain, but it was something, a fragment, a crack in the wall of her silence. "We're going to see the doctor now," he said, standing. "He's going to check you over, make sure you're all right. Do you understand?" No answer, but the humming. Ethan collected Luke and Maria, and together they made the journey back into town. The woman came docilely, allowing herself to be led to the wagon and settled in the back with Maria sitting beside her. Luke rode up front with Ethan again, his small face worried in the gathering dusk. Doc Pritchard's office was above the pharmacy on Main Street, and the doctor himself was waiting when they arrived, having been alerted by Deputy Crawford. He was a capable man in his 60s, with steady hands and a pragmatic view of human suffering that Ethan had always appreciated. "Bring her up," Pritchard said simply, holding the door. The examination took nearly an hour. Ethan waited downstairs with Luke, pacing the length of the pharmacy while the boy sat on a bench, silent and anxious. Maria had gone up with the woman at Pritchard's request, and Ethan could hear the murmur of voices above them, the creak of footsteps, the soft sound of distress that might have been the woman or might have been his imagination. When Pritchard finally came down, his face was grave. "Mr. Hale, a word in private?" They stepped outside into the cool evening air, leaving Luke inside. The street was quiet now, most folks at home having dinner, though Ethan could see curtains twitching in windows. The town's eyes never truly closed. "Well?" Ethan demanded. Physically, she's malnourished and dehydrated, with evidence of old injuries that healed poorly. The scars Maria mentioned. I'd guess some are from falling, maybe exposure to the elements. Nothing immediately life-threatening now, but she needs proper nutrition and rest. Pritchard paused, choosing his words. "Mentally, that's more complicated. Can you tell if she's—" Ethan couldn't finish the question. "If she's your wife?" Pritchard's eyes were sympathetic but professional. "Ethan, I can tell you that she has physical markers consistent with what I'd expect Elena to have. The scar from the horse, the mole, even a slight gap between her front teeth that I remember Elena having. Physically, she could be your wife. But trauma can do terrible things to the mind. If she survived the river, and that's a big if, and spent 7 years living rough, dealing with whatever hardships kept her from making it home, the psychological damage could be severe. What you're seeing, the confusion, the selective mutism, the regression to childlike behaviors, it's consistent with severe trauma. Can she recover?" Pritchard spread his hands helplessly. "I don't know. Maybe with time and care and safety. Maybe not. The human mind is resilient, but it's also fragile. She might improve gradually, or she might stay this way forever. I simply can't say." Ethan absorbed this, his jaw working. "You said if she survived the river. You have doubts?" "I have questions," Pritchard corrected. "How did she survive? Where has she been? How did she end up here after 7 years? These are things only she can answer, and right now, she can't answer anything." "So what do I do?" "That depends," the doctor said carefully, "on what you're prepared to accept. If you want certainty that this woman is Elena, you might never get it. There's no definitive test I can run, no proof I can offer beyond physical similarities and your own judgment. You'll have to decide for yourself what you believe." Ethan looked up at the window of the examination room, where he could see Maria's silhouette against the lamplight. "And if I'm wrong? If I take her home, care for her, believe she's Elena, and it turns out I'm mistaken? Then you'll have helped a woman who desperately needed help," Pritchard said simply. "I can think of worse mistakes to make." It was a generous interpretation, and Ethan knew it. The alternative, that he was so desperate to assuage his guilt that he'd convinced himself a random beggar was his dead wife, was too painful to contemplate directly. "Can she travel back to the ranch tonight?" "I'd prefer she rest here, but if you're gentle and Maria stays with her, it should be all right." Pritchard hesitated, then added, "Ethan, whatever you decide, you should know. This woman has been through hell. Whoever she is, wherever she came from, she's suffered greatly. She deserves kindness." "I know," Ethan said quietly. They collected the woman. Maria had gotten her dressed again and calmed after the examination, and made the journey home under a sky full of stars. The woman sat in the back with Maria, silent now. The humming finally stopped. Luke had fallen asleep against Ethan's shoulder, exhausted by the emotional weight of the day. As they approached the ranch, Ethan found himself thinking about Doc Pritchard's words, about kindness and suffering and the impossibility of certainty, about the choice he was facing, to believe or not to believe, to hope or not to hope, to open himself to the possibility of having Elena back, or to protect himself from the agony of being wrong. 7 years ago, he'd chosen to believe she was dead, to accept the loss and move on, to build walls around his heart that nothing could breach. Now he was being asked to make the opposite choice, to believe in the impossible, to tear down those walls and risk everything he'd built in their shelter. The ranch house loomed ahead, windows glowing with lamplight. Home. But whose home? His alone, as it had been for 7 years? Or theirs again, if he had the courage to believe it? Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop and sat for a moment, listening to Luke's soft breathing, feeling the weight of the choice pressing down on him like a physical thing. Then he climbed down, handed Luke to Tom Yates, who'd come out to meet them, and turned to help the woman from the wagon. She took his hand without hesitation, trusting in that childlike way that broke his heart, and let him guide her toward the house. As they reached the porch steps, she paused, looking up at the house with something that might have been recognition flickering in her eyes. Then it was gone, and she was moving again, allowing Maria to lead her inside and up to the guest room. Ethan stood alone on the porch, staring up at the stars, and made his decision. He didn't know if this woman was Elena. He might never know for certain, but Luke believed it, and something deep in Ethan's gut, something beyond reason or proof, believed it too. And if there was even a chance, even the smallest possibility that his wife had come back to him, then he owed it to her to find out. He owed it to her to try. The frozen life he'd built, the one where grief was transmuted into gold and love was safely buried in the past. That life was over now. Whatever came next would be messy and uncertain and terrifying. But it would be real. And maybe, just maybe, it would be redemption. Ethan walked into his house, closed the door behind him, and prepared himself for the hardest thing he'd ever done, learning to hope again. Morning came too early, slicing through the curtains of Ethan's bedroom with accusatory brightness. He hadn't slept, couldn't sleep, his mind churning through the impossibilities of the previous day until exhaustion and consciousness blurred into something that was neither rest nor waking. Somewhere in the dark hours before dawn, he'd heard footsteps in the hall, soft voices, and known without checking that Luke had crept into the guest room to sleep on the floor beside the woman who might be his mother. Ethan should have stopped him, should have maintained boundaries, protected the boy from the inevitable heartbreak that was surely coming. But he'd lain in his bed, staring at the ceiling, and done nothing, because some part of him, the part he'd tried to kill off 7 years ago, understood exactly why Luke needed to be close to her. Now, dressed and moving through the pre-dawn routine of the ranch, Ethan felt the weight of the previous day settling over him like a physical thing. The hands would know by now. News traveled fast in the bunkhouse, and he'd have to face their questions, their stares, their judgment about whether their boss had lost his mind. Tom Yates was waiting by the corral when Ethan emerged from the house, his weathered face carefully neutral in the way of men who'd seen too much to be easily shocked. "Boss?" he said by way of greeting. "Tom." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the horses mill in the early light. Finally, Tom cleared his throat. "The men are asking questions." "I expect they are. Want me to tell them anything in particular?" Ethan considered this. He could order silence, demand privacy, threaten anyone who gossiped with immediate dismissal. But that would only make things worse, turn speculation into wild rumor. "Tell them the truth," he said finally. "A woman appeared in town yesterday who may be my wife. We don't know for certain yet. Until we do, she's under my protection, and anyone who has a problem with that can collect their pay and move on." Tom nodded slowly. "Fair enough. For what it's worth, boss, I saw her yesterday. Saw her face when it was clean." He paused, choosing his words with care. "She's got Elena's eyes, same color, same shape. Could be coincidence, but you don't think it is?" "No, sir, I don't." It was the closest thing to validation Ethan had received, and coming from Tom, who'd known Elena, who'd helped search the river, who had no reason to encourage false hope, it meant something. "Thank you," Ethan said quietly. "You planning to keep her here? Where else would she go?" The question came out sharper than intended. "If she is Elena, this is her home. If she's not—" He stopped, the alternative refusing to form into words. "If she's not, she's still a woman who needs help," Tom finished for him. "Either way, reckon you're doing the right thing." Ethan wasn't sure there was a right thing in a situation like this, but he appreciated the sentiment nonetheless. They discussed the day's work, fences that needed mending in the south pasture, a water trough that had cracked in the last cold snap, The usual endless maintenance that kept a ranch this size running, and Ethan tried to focus on the familiar rhythms of command and planning. But his mind kept drifting back to the house, to the woman sleeping in the guest room, to all the questions that had no answers. When he finally returned to the house for breakfast, he found Maria in the kitchen, her face troubled. "She will not eat, senor," Maria said without preamble. "I brought her breakfast, eggs, toast, coffee, but she just looks at it. Luke tries to encourage her, but she spread her hands helplessly. Ethan climbed the stairs, his boots heavy on the wood, and found the guest room door open. Luke sat cross-legged on the bed beside the woman, holding a piece of toast, and speaking in that patient, encouraging voice children sometimes used with frightened animals. "It's good, see? Maria makes the best toast. Just try a little bite." The woman watched him with those distant eyes, but made no move to take the food. The tray Maria had brought sat untouched on the bedside table, growing cold. "Luke," Ethan said from the doorway, "go get ready for school." "But father, school, now." Luke's face fell, but he set down the toast and slid off the bed, pausing only to squeeze the woman's hand before leaving. The gesture was so tender, so full of hope and love, that Ethan had to look away. When they were alone, Ethan approached the bed slowly. The woman had pulled her knees up to her chest, making herself small, and was humming again, that same tuneless melody that seemed to be her default response to stress or uncertainty. "You need to eat," Ethan said, his voice gentler than he'd expected. "You're too thin as it is." No response. He picked up the plate of eggs and sat down in the chair beside the bed, the same chair he'd occupied last night. When Elena was pregnant with Luke, she couldn't keep anything down for the first 3 months. Morning sickness, though it lasted all day and night. The only thing she could stomach was dry toast and weak tea. The humming continued, but something in the woman's posture shifted slightly, as if she might be listening. The doctor said it would pass, and it did, but those months were hard. She lost weight instead of gaining it, and Ethan stopped, surprised by the emotion rising in his throat. "I felt helpless. There was nothing I could do to make it better." He held out a forkful of eggs. The woman looked at it, then at him, and slowly, so slowly, opened her mouth. Ethan fed her the bite, watching as she chewed mechanically, without apparent taste or enjoyment, but at least eating. They continued this way in silence, Ethan offering food, and the woman accepting it with that same passive compliance, until half the plate was gone. Then she turned her face away, refusing more, and Ethan didn't push. "That's good," he said, setting the plate aside. "That's better." The woman's eyes found his face, and for a moment they looked at each other in the morning light streaming through the window. Ethan searched those eyes for any sign of Elena, any spark of recognition, any hint of the sharp intelligence that had been his wife's defining characteristic, but found only that same empty confusion. "Where did you go?" The question escaped before he could stop it. "After the river. Where did you go?" She blinked at him, her brow furrowing slightly as if the question troubled her, but she couldn't quite grasp why. "Can you remember anything? Anything at all about what happened?" For a long moment, nothing. Then, so softly he almost missed it. "Dark. It was dark." Ethan leaned forward. "What was dark? The water?" "Everything." Her voice was distant, dreamy, as if she was speaking from very far away. "Cold and dark, and the water wouldn't stop." "The river," Ethan prompted. "You were in the river." "The river," she repeated, but it was clear she was just echoing his words, not confirming them from her own memory. He tried a different approach. "Do you know who I am?" She looked at him with those empty eyes, and he saw her struggle with the question, saw the effort it took to try to pull meaning from the fog of her damaged mind. "Safe," she said finally. "You're safe." It wasn't recognition, but it was something. Some instinct or feeling that told her he meant no harm. Ethan supposed he should be grateful for that much. "What about Luke, the boy? Do you know who he is?" This time, her face softened immediately, and something that might have been a smile touched her lips. "Mine," she said with surprising certainty. "He's mine." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. She couldn't remember her own name, couldn't say with certainty who Ethan was, but she knew Luke belonged to her. The maternal instinct, it seemed, ran deeper than memory or reason. "Yes," Ethan said, his voice rough. "He's yours." He wanted to add ours, but the word stuck in his throat, because accepting that would mean accepting everything, that this broken woman was Elena, that his wife had been alive and suffering for 7 years, that he'd failed her in every way that mattered. A knock at the door interrupted them. Maria stood in the hallway, her face apologetic. "Senor, there are men here to see you. They say it is important." Ethan's jaw tightened. He knew what this was. The town, in the form of its officials, come to investigate the spectacle from yesterday. He'd been expecting it, dreading it, but that didn't make it any easier to face. "Who?" he asked, though he already knew. "Sheriff Barnes and Deputy Crawford, also Mr. Pierce from the council." Of course. Samuel Pierce wouldn't miss an opportunity to involve himself in what was sure to be the most talked-about situation in Dry Creek Valley's recent memory. "Tell them I'll be down in a minute." When Maria left, Ethan turned back to the woman. "I have to go deal with some business. Maria will stay with you. You're safe here, you understand? No one is going to hurt you." She didn't acknowledge the words, just returned to humming and clutching the doll she'd retrieved from the pillow. Ethan stood, straightened his vest, and prepared himself for the confrontation he knew was coming. Sheriff Barnes was waiting in the front parlor, his substantial frame filling one of Elena's carefully chosen chairs. He was a practical man in his late 50s, elected more for his common sense than any particular skill with violence. Crawford stood behind him, notebook in hand, while Samuel Pierce occupied the settee with the self-important air of someone who believed his presence lent gravity to any situation. "Gentlemen," Ethan said, not bothering with warmth, "what can I do for you?" Barnes shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. "Mr. Hale, we need to talk about the woman you took from town yesterday." "What about her?" "Well, for starters, who is she? You made quite a claim in front of half the town." "I said she might be my wife. That's still true." Pierce leaned forward, his expression skeptical. "Ethan, your wife drowned 7 years ago. We all mourned her. You can't seriously expect us to believe—" "I don't expect anything from you, Samuel," Ethan cut him off coldly. "My wife's body was never recovered. It's possible she survived." "It's possible a lot of things," Pierce countered. "It's also possible you're being taken advantage of by a clever vagrant who bears a passing resemblance to Elena and saw an opportunity." The suggestion that someone might be deliberately deceiving him sparked anger in Ethan's chest, hot and immediate. That woman can barely speak. She doesn't know her own name. If this is a con, it's the most incompetent one I've ever seen. "Which is exactly what someone would want you to think," Pierce insisted. Sheriff Barnes raised a hand, forestalling the argument. "Ethan, Pierce's point, however badly made, has some merit. We have a responsibility to the community to ensure this situation is appropriate." "Appropriate?" Ethan's voice dropped dangerously. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that a woman of uncertain identity and mental state has been taken to your ranch, where she's currently under your sole control. Some folks might see that as problematic. Some folks need to mind their own business. It becomes the town's business when it involves one of our most prominent citizens and a potentially vulnerable woman," Barnes said carefully. "I'm not accusing you of anything, Ethan, but I need to verify that this woman is here of her own will and that she's being properly cared for." It was a reasonable request, Ethan knew, even if it grated against every instinct he had to tell them all to leave his property immediately. Barnes was doing his job, protecting someone who couldn't protect herself. Under different circumstances, Ethan would have approved. "Fine," he said tersely. "You can see her, but keep it brief. She's frightened easily." He led them upstairs, acutely aware of their footsteps behind him, their judgmental eyes taking in every detail of his home. Maria had stayed with the woman as instructed, and both looked up when the men entered. Maria with wariness, the woman with that same blank confusion. Barnes approached slowly, his voice gentle in a way that surprised Ethan. "Ma'am, I'm Sheriff Barnes. I just need to ask you a few questions. Is that all right?" The woman stared at him without responding. "Can you tell me your name?" "Nothing." "Do you know where you are?" No answer. "Are you here because you want to be or because you're being forced?" The woman's eyes drifted to Ethan, standing in the doorway, then to Maria, then back to Barnes. She clutched the doll tighter and began humming. Crawford, who'd been taking notes, looked up with frustration. "She's not answering anything, Sheriff. I can see that." Barnes studied the woman's face, and Ethan saw the exact moment the sheriff recognized the resemblance. His eyes widened slightly, then narrowed as he examined her more closely. The bone structure, the scar on her arm, features that must have matched his memory of Elena. "Doc Pritchard examined her last night," Ethan said. "He confirmed she has physical characteristics consistent with my wife. The scar from the horse, the mole, other details." "Physical characteristics aren't proof," Pierce interjected from the hallway, where he'd been hovering. "Lots of people have scars and moles. Not in the exact same places," Ethan shot back. Barnes raised a hand again, the peacemaker. "Ethan, I'm not saying she's not Elena. I'm saying we don't know for certain, and until we do, we need to be cautious. This woman is clearly not capable of making decisions for herself right now. Which is exactly why she needs care and protection," Ethan argued, "which I'm providing. You're also the one making the claim that she's your wife, which gives you a vested interest in the outcome." Barnes's voice was still gentle, but firm. "Can you see how that might be a conflict?" Ethan's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He could see it, even if he hated it. If someone else had come forward claiming a vagrant was their long-lost spouse, he'd have been suspicious too. But this wasn't someone else. This was his life, his wife, his chance at redemption. "What do you suggest?" he asked, the words tasting like ash. "For now, nothing changes. She stays here, you continue caring for her, but I'm going to ask Doc Pritchard to check on her regularly, and I'll be making visits myself to ensure her well-being. If at any point I believe she's being mistreated or coerced, she won't be. Then we won't have a problem." Barnes turned back to the woman. "Ma'am, if you ever need help, or if you want to leave here, you can tell Maria or you can tell me when I visit. Do you understand?" The woman had stopped humming and was watching Barnes with an intensity that was different from her usual vacant stare. Then, very clearly, she said, "Home." "You want to go home?" Barnes asked. She shook her head slowly. "This is home." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Pierce opened his mouth to argue, but Crawford touched his arm, stopping him. Even the deputy could recognize the significance of what she'd said. "How do you know this is home?" Barnes pressed gently. The woman's gaze drifted around the room, taking in details Ethan hadn't considered she'd notice. The wallpaper with its pattern of roses, the view from the window of the barn and corral beyond, the specific slant of morning light through the glass. "The roses," she murmured. "I picked the roses." Ethan's breath caught. The wallpaper had been Elena's choice, special ordered from Denver at considerable expense because she'd fallen in love with the pattern. It had been hung in this very room, which had been their bedroom before Ethan moved to a different room after her death, unable to sleep where they'd slept together. "Elena picked that wallpaper," Maria said quietly, confirming what Ethan couldn't bring himself to say. Pierce wasn't ready to concede. "She could have seen it through the window from outside. Could have been watching the house." "The windows face the back of the property," Ethan said coldly. "You can't see this wallpaper from anywhere outside the house. She'd have to have been inside to know about it." "Well, maybe nothing, Samuel." Ethan's patience had run out. "Sheriff, are we done here?" Barnes nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "For now. But Ethan, you need to understand, the town is talking. Some folks are sympathetic, but others think you've lost your mind. If she is Elena, you're going to need more proof than wallpaper and scars." "What kind of proof?" "The kind only she can give. Memories, specific details about your life together, something that proves she knows things only Elena would know." Barnes moved toward the door. "Until then, people are going to have doubts." After they left, Ethan sat with the woman in silence, processing what had just happened. She'd defended herself in her own way, offered proof that was meaningful even if it wasn't conclusive. But Barnes was right. It wasn't enough. Not for the town, not for the officials, maybe not even for Ethan himself despite how badly he wanted to believe. "Can you remember anything else?" he asked. Anything about this house? About our life here? The woman's face scrunched with effort, and he could see her struggling to pull fragments from the damaged landscape of her mind. A horse, she said finally. There was a horse, black with white feet. Ethan's heart began to pound. Go on. I was scared. He was so big. But you... She looked at Ethan directly, and for just a moment her eyes seemed clearer. You said I was braver than I thought. Midnight, Ethan breathed. The stallion we bought the year before the river. You were terrified of him. He kicked me. She touched the scar on her arm, the one from the horse. Yes, when we were trying to break him. I wanted to shoot him after that, but you wouldn't let me. Said it wasn't his fault he was scared. Something that might have been a smile touched her lips. Scared things bite. It was such a quintessentially Elena thing to say, practical and compassionate in equal measure, that Ethan felt tears burning behind his eyes for the first time in 7 years. What else? He asked urgently. What else do you remember? But the moment was already fading. Her eyes went distant again, and she shook her head as if trying to clear away fog. Tired, she murmured. So tired. Rest then, Ethan said, though it cost him everything to say it. He wanted to push, to pull every memory from her while she was this close to coherence, but he could see the exhaustion in every line of her body. He left her with Maria and went downstairs to find Luke had returned from saying goodbye to his departing school friends, his small face anxious. Is she all right? Those men didn't hurt her? She's fine, Ethan assured him. She told them this was her home. Luke's face lit up with hope so bright it was painful to see. Really? She remembers? Some things. Not everything, but some things. That means she's getting better, right? That means Ma is coming back? Ethan wanted to say yes, wanted to promise his son that everything would be all right, that Elena would recover fully, and their family would be whole again. But he'd learned the hard way that life didn't deal in happy guarantees. It means there's hope, he said instead. But recovery takes time, Luke. We have to be patient. I can be patient, Luke said with the earnest certainty of childhood. I can wait forever if I have to. Ethan pulled his son into a hug, holding him tight against the uncertainty of everything else. I know you can. The days that followed fell into an uneasy routine. Ethan managed the ranch while Maria cared for the woman during the day, and Luke spent every moment he could sitting with her, talking to her, reading to her from his books. The woman remained largely nonverbal, but slowly, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, small changes began to emerge. She started eating more regularly, though still needed encouragement. She began to sleep through the night instead of waking with frightened cries that brought Maria running. And occasionally, sparked by some random trigger, she'd offer fragments of memory. A story about Luke as a baby, a detail about the ranch, once even a recipe for the apple pie Elena used to make every Sunday. But the fragments were inconsistent and unreliable. Sometimes she'd confuse events or mix up timelines. Once she insisted she'd never been on a ranch before, couldn't possibly know how to ride, even though the next day she'd look at the horses in the corral and name 3 of them correctly. Sheriff Barnes came by weekly as promised, checking on her well-being with a thoroughness that Ethan appreciated even as it chafed. Doc Pritchard visited too, monitoring her physical recovery while remaining carefully non-committal about her mental state. She's getting stronger physically, the doctor reported after his 3rd visit. Putting on weight, sleeping better, but the mind, he shook his head. Still no way to know if she'll continue improving or if this is as far as she gets. The town remained divided. Some folks, particularly the women who'd known Elena well, came by with food and offers of help, their faces soft with sympathy. Others, like Samuel Pierce and his circle, continued to whisper about delusions and opportunistic vagrants. Ethan heard the gossip secondhand through Tom and the other hands, and while it angered him, he knew there was nothing he could do to stop it. What mattered was the woman herself. Whatever the truth of her identity, she existed, she needed help, and Ethan found himself caring for her with an intensity that surprised him. It wasn't the burning passion he'd felt for Elena in their marriage. This was gentler, more protective, the careful tending of something infinitely fragile. He took to sitting with her in the evenings after Luke went to bed, reading aloud from books or simply keeping her company. She seemed calmer when he was near, less prone to the sudden panics that sometimes seized her, and gradually, hesitantly, she began to speak more. "Why did you stop looking?" she asked one night, the question coming out of nowhere. Ethan set down his book, his heart suddenly hammering. "What? For me? Why did you stop looking for me?" The words were clearer than anything she'd said before, the question direct and devastating. Ethan stared at her, trying to see if this was really her, really Elena, asking, or just another fragment bubbling up from damaged memory. "I looked for 3 days," he said, his voice raw. "I rode the river until my horse collapsed. I searched every bank, every eddy, every place you might have washed up. When I didn't find you, when the sheriff said—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I thought you were dead. I thought there was no point in looking for a corpse. I wasn't dead. I know that now." She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers working over the doll she still carried everywhere. "I waited," she said finally. "I waited for you to find me." The accusation in those words, however gently spoken, cut deeper than any knife. Ethan had to look away, unable to face the judgment in her eyes, clearer now than he'd seen them since she arrived. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "If I'd known, if I'd had any idea you were alive, I would never have stopped looking. Never." "But you didn't know, and I couldn't remember, couldn't find my way back." Her voice was distant again, fading. "The water took everything. My name, my home, my face in the mirror. All of it just gone." "But you're here now," Ethan said desperately. "You're here and you're safe, and we're going to help you remember. However long it takes, we'll help you find your way back." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for a heartbeat he saw Elena there, fully present, fully aware, before the fog rolled back in and she was gone again, retreating into humming and the safety of the doll. But it was enough. That moment of clarity, that flash of the woman he'd loved, was enough to keep him going. The breakthrough, when it finally came, happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Ethan was in the barn checking on a mare who was close to foaling when Luke came running, his face flushed with excitement. "Father! Father! Come quick!" Ethan's first thought was danger. The woman had hurt herself, or run away, or had some kind of crisis. He dropped what he was doing and ran for the house, Luke racing ahead of him. But when he burst into the parlor, he found the woman standing at the window, perfectly calm, perfectly still, staring out at the corral where Tom was working with a young horse. "What's wrong?" Ethan demanded, looking around for the emergency. "Nothing's wrong," Maria said, and there was wonder in her voice. "Watch." As Ethan stood there, heart pounding from the sprint, the woman spoke without turning from the window. "That's Dancer," she said, her voice stronger than he'd ever heard it. "The foal that was born the spring before I left. She had trouble standing at first, remember? We stayed up all night with her." Ethan moved closer, barely breathing. "Yes, we called her Dancer because even though she stumbled, she kept trying to move." "She's beautiful now," the woman continued, and there was something in her tone, a warmth, a connection to the words she was saying, that was completely different from her usual mechanical responses. "All grown up." "Elena?" Ethan said the name like a prayer. She turned from the window, and her eyes were clear, not completely, not perfectly, but clearer than they'd been. And when she looked at him, there was recognition there. Tentative, uncertain, but undeniably real. "I'm trying," she said, and a single tear slid down her cheek. "I'm trying so hard to remember, but it's like looking through broken glass. I see pieces, but I can't make them fit together." Ethan closed the distance between them in 3 strides and took her hands in his. They were shaking. "You don't have to force it. The memories will come when they're ready." "What if they don't? What if I'm broken forever?" "Then we'll be broken together," he said fiercely. "You're home, Elena. Whatever else happens, you're home." She looked down at their joined hands, and something shifted in her expression. "I hurt you," she said softly. "By leaving. By not finding my way back sooner. I hurt you. The river hurt us both. I'm so sorry." Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully, like she might shatter if he squeezed too tight. She was rigid at first, uncertain, but slowly she relaxed against him, and he felt her hands clutch at his shirt. "Welcome home," he whispered into her hair. And for the first time in 7 years, Ethan Hale allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other after all. The moment of clarity didn't last. Within an hour, Elena had retreated back into the fog, leaving Ethan holding nothing but the memory of her lucidity and the desperate hope that it would return. But something had shifted nonetheless. She'd recognized Dancer, had called him by a name she couldn't have known unless she was truly Elena, and that single piece of evidence felt more substantial than all the scars and physical similarities combined. Luke had witnessed the exchange from the doorway, and his face glowed with vindication. For the boy, it had never been a question. He'd known from the first moment on that dusty street that this was his mother. Now he felt proven right, and he clung to Elena with renewed determination, as if his sheer force of will could pull her completely back from wherever she'd been lost. Ethan sent word to Doc Pritchard that evening, asking him to come by the next day. If Elena was starting to show signs of recovery, the doctor needed to document it, needed to see for himself that progress was possible. More than that, Ethan needed an ally, someone with medical authority who could testify that this woman's improving condition was consistent with Elena gradually healing from severe trauma, because the town's skepticism hadn't lessened. If anything, it had intensified as days turned into weeks without any dramatic revelation or undeniable proof. People wanted certainty, either confirmation that this was Elena miraculously returned, or proof that Ethan had been duped by a clever imposter. The ambiguous middle ground where they currently existed satisfied no one. Pritchard arrived the next afternoon, his medical bag in hand and his expression cautiously optimistic. Ethan led him upstairs to where Elena sat by the window, Luke at her feet reading aloud from a book about horses. She was listening, or seemed to be, her fingers still working over the doll, but her eyes focused on the boy, rather than lost in middle distance. "Mrs. Hale," Pritchard said gently, using the name deliberately. "How are you feeling today?" Elena looked up at him, and Ethan saw the flicker of recognition cross her face. "Doctor," she said, the word coming slowly but clearly. "You gave me medicine once for fever." Pritchard's eyebrows rose. "Did I?" "Luke was a baby. He was sick, and I was sick, and you came in the snow." Her brow furrowed with concentration. "You said we'd both be fine, but you looked worried." "That was 5 years before the flood," Ethan said quietly. "A bad winter. Half the territory had influenza." Pritchard was already making notes, his expression shifting from cautious to genuinely intrigued. "What else do you remember about that winter, Mrs. Hale?" Elena's hand stilled on the doll. "The wind. It wouldn't stop howling. And Ethan." She looked at him, her eyes clearer than they'd been since yesterday. "You slept in the chair beside the bed. For 3 nights. You wouldn't leave even though you might get sick too." Ethan's throat tightened. He'd forgotten that detail himself, buried under years of deliberately not remembering. But she was right. He'd refused to leave her and Luke, had stayed vigil until the fever broke for both of them. "Remarkable," Pritchard murmured, writing furiously. "These are specific, verifiable memories. Mrs. Hale, do you remember anything about the day of the flood? About what happened to you?" The clarity in Elena's eyes dimmed immediately, replaced by something that looked like panic. Her breathing quickened, and her hands clutched the doll so tightly her knuckles went white. "No," she whispered. "Don't make me remember. Please don't make me." "It's all right," Ethan said quickly, moving to her side. "You don't have to remember anything you're not ready for." Pritchard looked like he wanted to push further. The medical curiosity was clear on his face, but he respected Ethan's intervention and changed topics. They talked for another 20 minutes, the doctor asking gentle questions about the house, the ranch, people Elena had known, some questions she could answer, pulling details from the fractured landscape of her memory. Others left her blank and confused, struggling against walls she couldn't see or climb. When the examination concluded, Pritchard gestured for Ethan to follow him downstairs. In the study, with the door closed, the doctor's professional mask slipped slightly. "That was extraordinary," he said. "The specificity of those memories. the emotional connection to them. That's not something you can fake, Ethan. Whatever damage was done to her mind, there are pieces of Elena still in there, fighting to resurface. So you believe it's her? I believe the evidence is becoming very compelling. The physical markers were suggestive, but this, specific memories that can be corroborated, details about events and people that a stranger couldn't know, it's much harder to dismiss. Pritchard paused. Though I should warn you, the county may not see it that way. Ethan's jaw tightened. What do you mean? I mean that Samuel Pierce has been making noise to the territorial authorities. Questions about mental competency, concerns about undue influence, suggestions that a vulnerable woman is being kept in a situation she can't properly consent to. That's ridiculous. Elena is here because this is her home. To you and me, perhaps. But to someone who doesn't want to believe, who has reasons to doubt, it looks different. Pritchard's expression was sympathetic but realistic. The law doesn't run on hope and partial memories, Ethan. It runs on documentation and proof. If the county decides to investigate, they could remove her from your custody pending a formal determination of her identity and mental state. The words landed like physical blows. They can't do that. She's my wife. You believe she's your wife. That's not the same thing in the eyes of the law. Pritchard held up a hand before Ethan could explode. I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm saying you need to be prepared. Get your affairs in order. Document everything she remembers. Find anyone who can testify to her identity. Because if this goes to a hearing, you're going to need more than good intentions. After Pritchard left, Ethan stood in his study staring at nothing, fury and fear warring in his chest. The idea that someone could take Elena away, that the county could decide she'd be better off in some institution or under someone else's care, was intolerable. She was finally starting to heal, finally beginning to remember, and the thought of that progress being disrupted by bureaucratic interference made him want to break something. But Pritchard was right about one thing. He needed to be smart about this. Document everything, build a case, be ready to fight if fighting became necessary. He spent the rest of the afternoon writing down every memory Elena had shared, every detail she'd recalled, creating a chronological record of her recovery. Tom came by as the sun was setting, his face troubled. Boss, we might have a problem. Ethan looked up from his notes. What kind of problem? Riders coming up the road. Official looking, 4 of them, with a wagon. Ethan's stomach dropped. He'd expected interference, but not this soon, not this organized. He stood, straightening his vest, and prepared himself for whatever was coming. The riders turned out to be exactly what he'd feared. Territorial officials, led by a thin man in his 50s with the sour expression of someone who took petty authority very seriously. His name was Whitmore, and he introduced himself as a county administrator with jurisdiction over matters of mental competency and custodial disputes. Mr. Hale, Whitmore said, not bothering with pleasantries. I'm here regarding the woman currently residing on your property. We've received reports that raise concerns about her welfare and situation. Reports from whom? Ethan asked, though he already knew. That's not relevant. What is relevant is that I need to interview the woman and assess whether her current living arrangements are appropriate. She's recovering from severe trauma. Being interrogated by strangers isn't going to help that recovery. Whitmore's smile was thin and cold. I'm not here to debate medical treatment with you, Mr. Hale. I'm here to fulfill my legal obligations. Now you can cooperate and allow me to speak with her, or I can return with a marshal and a court order, your choice. Every instinct Ethan had screamed at him to refuse, to throw these men off his property and dare them to come back. But that would only make things worse, would give them ammunition to claim he was being uncooperative or had something to hide. Fine, he said through gritted teeth, but I'm present during any interview, and if she becomes distressed, it stops immediately. Agreed. Ethan led them inside, acutely aware of how this must look, him ushering county officials through his home to interrogate the woman he claimed was his wife. Maria met them in the hallway, her face alarmed, and Ethan quietly asked her to keep Luke occupied downstairs. The boy didn't need to witness whatever was about to happen. Elena was still by the window where Pritchard had left her, though now she was alone, the book abandoned on the floor. She looked up when they entered, and fear immediately clouded her features when she saw the strangers. Who are they? She asked, shrinking back in her chair. Officials from the county, Ethan said, keeping his voice calm despite the anger churning in his gut. They just want to ask you some questions. Whitmore stepped forward, his demeanor professionally detached. Ma'am, I'm Mr. Whitmore. I need to determine whether you're here of your own free will and whether your living situation is appropriate for your condition. Elena looked at Ethan, confusion and panic warring on her face. I don't understand. It's all right, Ethan assured her. Just answer his questions honestly. Whitmore pulled out a small notebook, his pen poised. Let's start with something simple. What's your name? Elena's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Ethan could see her struggling, searching through the fog for something solid to grasp. I don't... You don't know your name? Elena, she said finally, but there was uncertainty in her voice. I think. They say I'm Elena. Who says that? She gestured toward Ethan. He does, and the boy. They say I'm Elena Hale. Whitmore made a note, his expression giving nothing away. But you don't remember being Elena Hale. I remember pieces, fragments, like broken glass. Her agitation was growing, her hands twisting the doll. Why are you asking me this? What do you want? I want to understand your situation, ma'am. You're living here with Mr. Hale, who claims you're his wife, but you can't confirm that yourself. I can confirm pieces, Elena insisted, and there was a flash of something stronger in her voice. Frustration, maybe even anger. I remember this house. I remember that wallpaper. I remember the horses, the ranch, the winter we were sick. I remember... She stopped, her breathing ragged. But you don't remember being married to Mr. Hale? I remember loving him, she said, and the words hit Ethan like a thunderbolt. I remember that feeling, even if I can't remember all the details. I remember it mattered. He mattered. Whitmore's pen kept moving across the page. Are you here because you want to be, or because Mr. Hale is keeping you here? Keeping me? Elena's confusion was genuine. No, this is home. Where else would I go? There are facilities that specialize in caring for people with mental difficulties, places where you could receive proper medical attention. You want to take me away? The panic in Elena's voice was rising now, sharp and immediate. No, I won't go. You can't make me. Ma'am, please calm down. She said no, Ethan interrupted, moving between Whitmore and Elena. You heard her. She wants to stay here. Mr. Hale, a woman in her condition isn't capable of making informed decisions about her own welfare. That's precisely why my office exists, to protect vulnerable individuals from situations that may not be in their best interest. Her best interest is to be with her family, in her home, where she feels safe, not locked up in some institution surrounded by strangers. Whitmore's expression hardened. You're emotionally compromised, Mr. Hale. You want this woman to be your wife so badly that you're willing to overlook the very real possibility that she's not. That she's a mentally ill vagrant who needs professional care, not whatever this is. The accusation hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Ethan's hands clenched into fists, and it took every ounce of control he had not to physically throw the man out of his house. Get out, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Mr. Hale, I said get out. You've conducted your interview. She said she wants to stay. That's all you need to know. Whitmore stood his ground. I have the authority to remove her immediately if I believe she's in danger or being unduly influenced. On what grounds? She's being fed, clothed, cared for by a doctor, and allowed to recover in peace. There's no abuse, no coercion, no danger. You have nothing. I have a woman who can't remember her own name living with a man who has a vested interest in claiming she's someone she may not be. Whitmore closed his notebook with a sharp snap. I'm going to recommend to the territorial court that she be placed in protective custody pending a formal competency hearing. Behind Ethan, Elena made a sound of pure distress. When he turned, he saw her face had gone white, her eyes wide with the kind of primal fear that transcended reason or memory. Please, she whispered, please don't let them take me. I can't go back to being lost. Please. Something in Ethan broke open at the raw terror in her voice. All the careful control, all the strategic thinking about documentation and legal proceedings, none of it mattered in the face of her fear. They're not taking you anywhere, he said firmly, then turned back to Whitmore. You want to remove her? You're going to need that court order you mentioned. Until you have one, she stays here. That can be arranged very quickly, Mr. Hale. Then arrange it, but you're leaving my property now. The standoff lasted another tense moment before Whitmore gestured to his men. We'll be back, Mr. Hale, with proper authority. I suggest you prepare yourself for that eventuality. Ethan watched them go, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. When their wagon finally disappeared down the road, he turned to find Elena had curled into herself on the chair, rocking slightly, the doll pressed against her chest. They're going to take me, she whispered. They're going to put me somewhere dark and cold, and I won't remember anything ever again. No, Ethan said fiercely, kneeling beside her chair. I won't let that happen. I promise you, Elena, they are not taking you anywhere. How can you stop them? If they come with papers, with authority, then we'll fight them. In court, in front of a judge, whatever it takes. He took her hands, willing her to believe him. You're not going back to being lost. Not while I'm still breathing. She searched his face, looking for certainty, for safety, for something to hold on to. Why? She asked. Why fight so hard for someone who might not even be your wife? Who can't give you what you need? The question pierced him. Because you are my wife. I know it here. He pressed her hand against his chest, over his heart. I know it in ways that don't require proof or documentation. And even if I'm wrong, even if somehow this is all a terrible mistake, you're still a person who deserves protection and care. I'm not letting them lock you away like some problem to be hidden. Tears slipped down Elena's cheeks. I'm trying so hard to remember, to be who you need me to be. You don't have to be anyone but who you are right now. The rest will come when it's ready. He wiped her tears gently. But we need to be smart about this. If it goes to a hearing, we need evidence. We need you to remember as much as you can, and we need witnesses who can testify to your identity. Over the next 3 days, Ethan worked with desperate focus. He brought people to the ranch, old friends of Elena's, women she'd quilted with, the reverend who'd married them, anyone who might be able to trigger memories or testify to her identity. Some visits went well, sparking flashes of recognition and fragments of conversation. Others ended in confusion and frustration when Elena couldn't place faces or recall shared experiences. Sarah Henderson from the general store came and brought fabric samples, hoping to jog memories of shopping trips and dress fittings. Elena touched the fabrics with trembling fingers and said they felt familiar but couldn't say why. Tom Yates sat with her on the porch and talked about working the ranch in the early days, about jokes Elena used to make and meals she used to cook for the hands during branding season. She listened intently, nodding at some details, confused by others. Each visit was documented, each memory recorded. Ethan was building a case, piece by fragile piece, but he knew it might not be enough. The law wanted certainty, and what they had was a collection of maybes and partial recollections. On the 4th day, Sheriff Barnes arrived with the expected paperwork. His face was apologetic but resigned as he handed Ethan the court order. Hearing set for Monday, Barnes said. Whitmore pushed it through fast. Judge Morrison will preside. Ethan scanned the document, his stomach sinking. It was official, legal, undeniable. Elena was to appear before the territorial court to determine her competency and identity, and the court had the authority to place her in institutional care if they deemed it necessary for her welfare. Barnes, you know this is wrong, Ethan said quietly. What I know is that the law doesn't care about what feels right or wrong. It cares about what can be proven. The sheriff's expression softened. For what it's worth, Ethan, I hope you win this. I hope she is Elena, and I hope the judge sees that. But you need to be prepared for the possibility that he won't. After Barnes left, Ethan sat Elena down and explained what was going to happen. She listened with growing dread, her hands shaking in her lap. I have to go in front of strangers and prove I'm me, she said flatly. Prove something I can barely remember myself. You just have to tell the truth. Tell them what you do remember. Show them you're improving. Let them see that you're safe here. What if it's not enough? Ethan didn't have an answer for that. The weekend passed in tense preparation. Doc Pritchard came by to review his medical findings and promised to testify on Elena's behalf. Tom and Maria both agreed to appear as witnesses. Luke, when he understood what was happening, declared he would tell the judge himself that this was his mother and anyone who said different was lying. Sunday evening, Ethan found Elena in the barn. She was standing by Midnight's stall, the big black stallion that had kicked her all those years ago. The horse had his head over the door, and Elena was stroking his nose with gentle fingers. "I remember being afraid of him," she said without turning around. "I remember the pain when he kicked me. But I also remember—" She paused, searching for the words. "I remember feeling like I had to prove I wasn't weak. That fear didn't have to win." Ethan moved to stand beside her. "You were never weak, Elena. Even when you were terrified, you faced it. I'm terrified now," she admitted. "Of tomorrow. Of what they might decide. Of losing this—" She gestured around the barn, but Ethan understood she meant more than just the physical space. She meant the fragile sense of home she'd started to build, the connection to Luke, the pieces of herself she'd begun to recover. "You're not going to lose it," Ethan said, praying he could make it true. She turned to face him, and in the dim light of the barn, with dust motes floating in the last rays of sunset, she looked so much like the Elena he'd married that his breath caught. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. "Something I remembered yesterday, but I was too afraid to say." "What is it?" "The night of the flood. I was coming to find you. There was something important, something I needed to tell you, and I couldn't wait." Her eyes filled with tears. "But I can't remember what it was. I just remember it mattered, and I thought if I could just reach you, everything would be all right. And then the water came, and everything went dark. And when I woke up, I didn't know who I was or where I belonged." Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her while she cried against his chest. "You belong here," he said into her hair. "You've always belonged here. The water tried to take that away, but it failed. You found your way back." "Did I?" Her voice was muffled against his shirt. "Or did Luke find me? Did you claim me not because you were certain, but because you needed to believe?" "Does it matter?" She pulled back to look at him. "Doesn't it?" "No," Ethan said firmly. "What matters is that you're here now, and you're healing, and we're not giving up. Not on you, not on us, not on the possibility that every memory you recover brings you closer to being whole again." Monday morning arrived with brutal inevitability. Ethan dressed in his best suit, the one he wore to important business meetings and town council hearings. Elena wore a dress Maria had altered to fit her thinner frame, her hair braided neatly, her hands clasped tight around the doll she refused to leave behind. Luke wanted to come, but Ethan insisted he stay at the ranch with Maria. The boy's testimony, however heartfelt, would carry little weight with the court, and Ethan didn't want him to witness his mother being interrogated and potentially taken away. The territorial courthouse was a 2-story brick building in the center of Dry Creek Valley, imposing in its authority despite its modest size. A crowd had gathered, news of the hearing had spread, and it seemed like half the county had turned out to watch the spectacle of Ethan Hale fighting to keep the woman he claimed was his wife. Judge Morrison was a stern man in his 60s, with iron gray hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd spent decades sorting truth from lies. He listened to Whitmore's opening statements with a face that revealed nothing, then turned his attention to Elena. "Mrs. Hale, or whoever you are, do you understand why you're here today?" Elena stood, her voice soft but steady. "They want to know if I'm Elena Hale. They want to know if I should be allowed to stay with my family or be sent away." "And what do you say to that?" "I say—" She paused, gathering courage. "I say I am Elena Hale. I can't prove it the way they want, with perfect memories and clear recollections. But I know this. I know Ethan's face, even through the fog. I know my son's voice. I know the smell of the ranch, the feel of my own home. I know I belong there, even if I can't explain how I know." Morrison made a note. "You tell me anything specific about your life before the flood, anything that would verify your identity." And so Elena began to speak. Haltingly at first, then with growing confidence, she pulled fragments from her broken memory. She described the wedding ceremony, getting details wrong, but the emotions right. She talked about Luke's birth, about the terror and joy mixed together. She named horses, described rooms in the house, recalled conversations and arguments and quiet moments that only she and Ethan would have known about. It wasn't perfect. She confused dates, mixed up sequences of events, contradicted herself occasionally. But the core truth of her experiences rang through every word, and Ethan watched the judge's expression shift from skepticism to something that might have been consideration. When Elena finished, Morrison called Doc Pritchard to the stand. The doctor testified about her physical condition, the scars that matched Elena's known injuries, the gradual improvement in her mental state. In your professional opinion, Dr. Pritchard, is this woman Elena Hale? I believe the evidence strongly suggests that she is, Your Honor. The physical markers, the specific memories, the emotional connections, all of it points to a woman recovering from severe trauma, not an imposter. Tom took the stand next, his testimony simple and direct. I knew Mrs. Hale for 5 years before the flood. This woman has her face, her voice, and she knows things about this ranch that a stranger wouldn't know. She might be broken, but she's Elena Hale nonetheless. Whitmore cross-examined each witness, trying to poke holes in their certainty, to suggest alternative explanations for every piece of evidence, but his arguments felt increasingly thin against the weight of accumulated testimony. Finally, Morrison turned to Ethan. Mr. Hale, you've built your case on fragments and faith. What happens if this woman never fully recovers? What if she stays exactly as she is now, confused, uncertain, dependent on others for basic care? Ethan stood, meeting the judge's eyes. Then I'll care for her exactly as I would have cared for Elena if she'd come home whole. She's my wife, Your Honor. In sickness and in health, that's what I promised. The fact that the sickness is in her mind rather than her body doesn't change my obligation. And if the court determines she's not your wife, if we decide the evidence is insufficient, then she's a woman who desperately needs help, who's found safety and healing in my home, and I'll continue providing that help for as long as she needs it. Ethan's voice hardened with determination. Either way, I'm not letting her be locked away in some institution to finish the job the river started. Morrison was silent for a long moment, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Then he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of authority. This court finds the evidence, while imperfect, to be compelling. The physical markers, the specific memories, the testimony of credible witnesses, all point to a reasonable conclusion that this woman is, in fact, Elena Hale, suffering from severe psychological trauma related to her ordeal. He looked at Elena directly. Mrs. Hale, you are free to remain with your husband. However, you will be required to continue treatment with Dr. Pritchard, and this court reserves the right to revisit this decision if circumstances change. Do you understand? Yes, Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face. Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Whitmore's face went red with anger, but he had no grounds to object to a judge's ruling. Morrison banged his gavel, called for order, and declared the matter settled. Outside, in the bright afternoon sun, Ethan pulled Elena close while well-wishers crowded around them. Some offered congratulations, others simply nodded in acknowledgement. The town had its answer now, official and legal, and whether everyone believed it or not, they would have to accept it. It's over, Elena said, clutching Ethan's hand like a lifeline. They can't take me away now. No, Ethan agreed. They can't. You're home, Elena. You're finally home. And for the first time since that impossible Sunday when Luke had whispered 4 words that changed everything, Ethan allowed himself to believe it completely. The woman beside him was his wife, broken, healing, but undeniably his. The river had tried to take her. The world had tried to forget her, but she'd survived it all and found her way back. Now they just had to learn how to live with the scars they both carried. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but it was a different kind of silence than the one that had filled the wagon on the journey into town. Elena sat beside Ethan on the driver's seat, her hand resting lightly on his arm, and though she said nothing, he could feel the tension slowly draining from her body with each mile that put distance between them and the courthouse. When the ranch house came into view, Luke burst from the front door and ran down the road to meet them, Maria following at a more dignified pace. The boy's face was alight with questions and hope, and the moment the wagon stopped, He was climbing up to throw his arms around Elena. Did you win? Are you staying? What did the judge say? Elena pulled him close, burying her face in his hair. I'm staying, she whispered. I'm staying, Luke, I promise. The boy's shoulders shook with silent sobs, and Ethan had to look away, his own emotions too close to the surface. Maria crossed herself and murmured something in Spanish that sounded like a prayer of gratitude, then shooed them all toward the house. Come, come. I made your favorite stew, senora. You need to eat, build your strength. That evening felt different than any that had come before. There was a lightness in the house, a sense of possibility that hadn't existed when every day carried the threat of Elena being taken away. Luke insisted on sitting between his parents at dinner, one hand holding Elena's and the other reaching occasionally to touch Ethan's arm, as if reassuring himself they were both real and present. Elena ate more than Ethan had seen her consume at one meal, and though her hand still trembled slightly when she lifted her spoon, there was color in her cheeks and a spark in her eyes that spoke of something beyond mere survival. Tell me about the ranch, she said suddenly, looking at Ethan. Tell me what's changed since before. Ethan set down his fork, considering. The South Pasture has a new irrigation system. Tom designed it 2 years ago, cuts the water waste by half. We've got twice the head of cattle we had 7 years ago, and we started breeding quarter horses 3 summers back. Quarter horses, Elena repeated, and something flickered across her face. I always wanted to try breeding horses, said we should diversify, not put all our investment in beef. I remember, Ethan said quietly. You were right. The horses have been profitable. She smiled then, small and uncertain, but genuine. I was always right about the business side. You were better with the animals, but I could read a ledger. It was such a casual statement, delivered with such natural confidence that it took Ethan's breath away. For a moment, she wasn't the broken woman who'd appeared on the street or the confused patient struggling through recovery. She was just Elena, stating a simple truth about their partnership. Yes, he managed. You could. Luke looked between them, his young face glowing. Do you remember other things? About before? Elena's smile faded slightly as she considered. Pieces. It's like looking at a quilt where half the patches are missing. I can see the pattern trying to emerge, but there are holes everywhere. She touched Luke's cheek gently. But some pieces are clearer than others. I remember being so afraid when you were born, afraid I wouldn't know how to be a mother, and then you were there, so small and perfect, and I thought my heart might break from loving you so much. Luke's eyes filled with tears. I love you too, Ma. I never stopped, even when Father said you were gone. Ethan felt the weight of those words, the implicit accusation beneath them. He'd told Luke his mother was dead, had insisted on it even when the boy's instincts told him otherwise. Looking at them now, at the bond that had survived 7 years of separation and trauma, he understood how wrong he'd been to try to force acceptance of that loss. After dinner, while Maria cleared the table and Luke reluctantly headed upstairs to prepare for bed, Ethan and Elena sat together on the porch. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of hay and horses and the distant promise of rain. Elena had wrapped herself in one of the shawls Maria had given her, and she stared out at the darkening landscape with an expression Ethan couldn't quite read. It feels right, she said finally. Being here. Even when I can't remember why, it feels right. That's something, Ethan offered. Is it enough? The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Enough for what? For him? For their marriage? For the life they were trying to rebuild from fragments? Elena, he said carefully, I don't expect you to be the person you were before the river. I'm not trying to recreate something that's gone. Whatever we build now, it starts from where we are. She turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face. And where are we, Ethan? Really? You've claimed me as your wife, fought for me, protected me. But we're strangers, aren't we? I can't remember our wedding night, or our first kiss, or any of the 1,000 small moments that make up a marriage. How do we move forward from that? The same way we'd move forward from any loss, Ethan said. One day at a time, one memory at a time. And if the old memories never come back completely, then we make new ones. Is that what you want? To start over with someone who looks like your wife but can't be what she was. Ethan reached out and took her hand, feeling the familiar and unfamiliar weight of it in his palm. I want you to heal. I want Luke to have his mother. And yes, I want... He stopped, swallowed hard. I want the chance to do better than I did before, to be the husband you needed and deserved. You think you failed me. It wasn't a question. I know I did. I should have kept looking, should have searched longer, farther, should have refused to believe you were gone until I had proof. Instead, I gave up and buried myself in work and told myself I was moving on. The confession tasted bitter. You were out there somewhere, lost and alone, and I stopped searching. Elena was quiet for a long moment, her thumb absently rubbing across his knuckles. I don't remember enough to judge you for that, she said finally. And even if I could, what would be the point? We can't change what happened. We can only decide what happens next. What do you want to happen next? She considered this, her gaze drifting back to the horizon. I want to remember more. I want to wake up one morning and know who I am without having to search for it. I want to look at Luke and remember every moment of his life, not just fragments. And I want... She paused, vulnerability clear in her voice. I want to not be so afraid all the time. Afraid of what? Of forgetting again, of the darkness coming back, of waking up and not knowing where I am or who these people are who say they love me. Her hand tightened on his. Sometimes I panic in the middle of the night, convinced this is all a dream, and I'm going to wake up on that riverbank again, lost and broken. Ethan pulled her closer, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. You're not going back to the river, Elena. I promise you that. You can't promise that, she said softly. My mind is damaged, Ethan. Doc Pritchard said so. What if I get worse instead of better? What if the memories never come back? What if I'm like this forever? Then you're like this forever, and we deal with it. He said it with more confidence than he felt, but he meant every word. I didn't fight the county just to abandon you when things get difficult. She turned in his arms, studying his face in the fading light. You're a better man than you think you are. I'm trying to be the man you needed me to be 7 years ago. Maybe that's not the man I need now, Elena said. Maybe I need someone who can accept that I'm broken and not try to fix me. Someone who can be patient with the gaps and gentle with the fear. I can do that, Ethan said. I'm learning to do that. They sat together in the gathering darkness, holding each other against the uncertainties that lay ahead. And for the first time since Elena's return, Ethan allowed himself to think beyond the immediate crises. The court had ruled in their favor. The town would have to accept it. Now came the harder work, learning to live together, to navigate the strange territory of a marriage rebuilt from ruins. The first storm came 3 nights later. Ethan woke to screaming, raw, terrified screams that tore through the quiet house like gunfire. He was out of bed and running before he was fully conscious, his heart hammering in his chest. Elena's room, she still slept in the guest room, neither of them ready to navigate the intimacy of sharing a bed, was chaos. She'd torn the blankets off, knocked over the bedside table, and was pressed into the corner, her eyes wide and unseeing with panic. "The water!" she was screaming. "The water won't stop. It's everywhere. I can't breathe." Maria appeared in the doorway, her nightgown hastily wrapped, and Luke was right behind her, his face white with fear. "Luke, stay back," Ethan ordered, then approached Elena slowly, hands raised. "Elena, it's all right. You're safe. There's no water." But she couldn't hear him. She was somewhere else entirely, trapped in the nightmare of the flood, reliving whatever horrors the river had inflicted. When Ethan tried to touch her shoulder, she lashed out, catching him across the face hard enough to split his lip. "Don't let me drown," she sobbed. "Please, please don't let me drown." "You're not drowning," Ethan said, tasting blood. "Elena, look at me. Focus on my voice. You're in the ranch house. You're safe. The river is miles away." It took 20 minutes to bring her back. 20 minutes of patient repetition, of Ethan talking steadily about where they were and what was real, of Maria lighting every lamp in the room to chase away the darkness that fed Elena's terror. Finally, the panic began to recede. Elena's breathing slowed, her eyes regained focus, and she collapsed against the wall, shaking violently. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." "You have nothing to apologize for," Ethan said, though his cheek was throbbing where she'd struck him. Luke pushed past Maria and threw himself at his mother, wrapping his small arms around her. "It's okay, Ma. The bad dream can't hurt you. We won't let it." Elena clung to the boy, and Ethan watched as Luke's presence grounded her in a way his words hadn't been able to. There was something about the child, some connection that ran deeper than memory or reason, that could reach Elena even in her darkest moments. After Maria took Luke back to bed and Elena was settled again, Ethan sat with her in the lamplight. Her face was tear-stained and exhausted, but calmer. "It was so real," she said quietly. "I was back in the water, and it was pulling me under, and I couldn't remember how to swim. I couldn't remember anything except being afraid." "How often does this happen?" She looked away, ashamed. "Most nights. Sometimes I can pull myself out of it before it gets bad. Tonight I couldn't." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you'd already sacrificed so much. I didn't want you to know how broken I really am." Her voice cracked. "You fought the county for me. You stood up in court and claimed me as your wife. And this is what you get, a woman who screams in the night and can't tell the difference between past and present." Ethan reached out and lifted her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You listen to me, Elena Hale. You are not broken. You're healing from something that would have destroyed most people. The fact that you're here, that you survived, that you're fighting your way back, that's not weakness. That's strength I can't even comprehend." "It doesn't feel like strength." "I know, but it is." He gentled his voice. "And you don't have to fight alone. If you have nightmares every night for the rest of your life, then we'll deal with nightmares every night. That's what marriage means." "We barely have a marriage," Elena pointed out. "We have a legal ruling and shared history neither of us can properly access." "Then we'll build one," Ethan said firmly. "From here, from now. No more pretending that what we had before is what we'll have again. We start fresh, Elena. We learn each other again, take it slow, and see what emerges." She studied his face, and he could see her weighing his words, testing them for sincerity. "You really mean that?" "Every word." "What if I can't be a proper wife to you? What if the intimacy, what if I can't?" "Then we don't," Ethan interrupted before she could finish articulating the fear. "Elena, I'm not expecting you to share my bed or play a role you're not ready for. Right now, I just want you to feel safe. Everything else can wait." The relief in her expression was almost painful to see. "Thank you," she whispered. They talked through the rest of the night, Elena gradually opening up about the terrors that plagued her sleep and the gaps that frustrated her waking hours. She remembered fragments of their life together but couldn't string them into a coherent narrative. She knew she loved Luke with a fierceness that transcended memory, but couldn't recall his first word or first step. She recognized the ranch as home, but got lost in rooms she should have known by heart. "It's like being a ghost," she said as dawn began to break. "Walking through a life that should be mine, but feeling like I'm on the outside looking in." "You're not a ghost," Ethan assured her. "You're real and present and here. The rest will come with time." "And if it doesn't?" "Then it doesn't," he said simply. "We make new memories that are just as real as the old ones." In the weeks that followed, they settled into a new rhythm. Ethan moved his work schedule around to spend more time at the house, teaching Elena about the ranch operations and slowly rebuilding the partnership they'd once had. She proved to have an instinct for the business side that matched what he remembered, suggesting improvements to the books, pointing out inefficiencies in their supply chain, analyzing market trends with a sharp eye that emerged despite her damaged memory. "See?" Ethan said one afternoon as they reviewed the quarterly accounts. "You still have it. The head for numbers." Elena smiled, pleased with herself. "It feels natural, like my hands remember even when my mind doesn't." Luke became her constant companion, chattering about his school lessons and his friends and the horse he hoped to learn to ride next year. Elena listened with rapt attention, soaking up every detail about the son she'd missed so much of. Slowly, she began to share stories too, fragments of memory that surfaced unexpectedly, triggered by Luke's words or actions. "You used to sing to me," Luke said one evening, "before bed. Do you remember the song?" Elena's face went distant, searching. Then, hesitantly, she began to hum. The melody was rough and uncertain at first, but it was the same one she'd been humming since the day Luke found her on the street. As she hummed, words began to emerge, a lullaby about stars and dreams and keeping watch through the night. Luke's face lit up with recognition. That's it. That's the song. I remember, Elena breathed, wonder in her voice. I remember singing this. I remember you wouldn't sleep unless I sang it 3 times, and I'd get so tired, but I never minded because you looked so peaceful when you finally closed your eyes. It was a small victory, but it felt enormous. Each recovered memory, no matter how minor, was proof that healing was possible, that the woman she'd been wasn't entirely lost. But the nightmares continued. Some nights were better than others. Elena would wake gasping but able to calm herself quickly. Other nights were as bad as that first storm, requiring hours of patient grounding before the terror released its grip. Ethan took to sleeping in the chair in her room, ready to help when the darkness came calling. You don't have to do this, Elena protested one night, seeing him settle into what had become his usual post. Yes, I do, Ethan said simply. You'll ruin your back sleeping in that chair. My back will survive. She was quiet for a moment, then asked the question that had clearly been weighing on her. When will you want more from me? More than this careful friendship we're building? Ethan considered his answer carefully. When you're ready to offer it, and not a moment before. That's not fair to you. Elena, 7 years ago I buried you, mourned you, accepted that I'd never see you again. Having you here, alive, healing, that's more than I ever dreamed possible. I'm not going to demand something you're not ready to give just because the law says you're my wife. Other men would, she pointed out. I'm not other men, and you're not. He stopped, searching for the right words. You're not an obligation I'm fulfilling or a possession I own. You're a person who's been through hell and survived. That deserves respect and patience, not demands and expectations. Tears slipped down Elena's cheeks. I don't know what I did to deserve you. You loved me, Ethan said quietly. Whatever else you can't remember, I remember that. You loved me enough to brave a storm to reach me, loved me enough to fight your way back through 7 years of darkness. That's more than most people get in a lifetime. The ranch work provided structure and purpose for Elena's days. Maria taught her to cook again, working through recipes that sometimes sparked flashes of muscle memory. Elena's hands seemed to know how to knead bread dough or season stew even when her conscious mind had no recollection of learning the skills. Tom Yates became an unexpected ally in her recovery. He'd approach her in the barn or the yard with casual questions about horses or ranch business, never pressing but always ready to fill in gaps when her memory faltered. He treated her not as an invalid or a mystery to be solved, but as the ranch co-owner she'd once been, and Elena responded to that respect with growing confidence. Tom thinks I should start working with the quarter horses, she told Ethan one evening. Says I have a good eye for bloodlines, even if I can't remember where I learned it. Do you want to? I think so. It would give me something that's mine, something I'm building now rather than trying to recover from before. She paused. Is that all right? If I create new things instead of just trying to resurrect old ones? More than all right, Ethan assured her. This ranch is as much yours as it is mine, Elena. Always has been, even when you were gone. Whatever you want to do with it, you have my full support. She started spending her mornings with the horses, learning their personalities and quirks, making notes about potential breeding pairs and training regimens. Ethan would find her in the corral, talking softly to a mare, or watching a colt run, and see glimpses of the woman she'd been, confident, capable, fully engaged with the world around her. But progress was never linear. For every good day, there were setbacks. Moments when Elena would forget where she was or why. Panic attacks triggered by unexpected sounds or smells. Crushing waves of grief for the years she'd lost and the memories she couldn't recover. The worst episode came on a Tuesday morning 6 weeks after the court hearing. Ethan found Elena in the kitchen, staring at a kettle on the stove with an expression of absolute terror. Elena, what's wrong? The kettle, she whispered. It's boiling. I can hear it, but I don't know. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it. Ethan moved the kettle off the heat, trying to understand. You were making tea. Was I? She looked around the kitchen as if seeing it for the first time. I don't remember coming in here. I don't remember. Her breathing accelerated, panic setting in. Who are you? Why am I in this house? It was like watching her disappear before his eyes, the fragile progress of weeks evaporating in seconds. Ethan kept his voice calm despite the fear clutching his chest. I'm Ethan, your husband. You're in our ranch house. You live here. You're safe. But Elena was shaking her head, backing away. No, I don't know you. I don't know this place. I need to leave. She made for the door, but Ethan stepped in front of her, careful not to touch or crowd. Elena, please, just listen to my voice. You know me. We've been rebuilding together. You remember the horses and Luke, Elena repeated, and something in her expression shifted. There's a boy. Luke. He's mine. Yes, your son. Our son. She stared at Ethan, struggling to connect the pieces. Slowly, agonizingly, recognition began to seep back into her eyes. Ethan. Yes. I'm here. You're home. Elena crumpled, and he caught her before she hit the floor, holding her while she sobbed against his chest. I forgot, she cried. I forgot everything for a moment. It was all just gone, and I was so scared. It came back, though, Ethan said, stroking her hair. The memories came back. That's what matters. What if next time they don't? What if I forget and it's permanent? It was a fear Ethan shared but couldn't voice. Instead, he held her tighter and made promises he wasn't certain he could keep. We'll handle it. Whatever happens, we'll handle it together. Doc Pritchard, when consulted about the episode, was cautiously reassuring. The brain is still healing. Sometimes the pathways get confused, connections break down temporarily. The fact that she recovered so quickly is actually a good sign. It means the memories are there, just occasionally difficult to access. Will it keep happening? Possibly. There's no way to predict. Trauma recovery isn't a straight line, Ethan. There will be setbacks and plateaus and leaps forward. All you can do is provide stability and patience. Stability and patience. Ethan repeated the words to himself like a mantra during the difficult days that followed. Elena's confidence had been shaken by the episode, making her hesitant to do things alone or venture far from the house. But slowly, with encouragement from Ethan and Maria and Luke, she began to regain her footing. 3 months after the court hearing, on a cool autumn morning, Elena asked Ethan if they could ride out to the river. Are you sure? He asked, concerned. That might be difficult for you. I need to see it, she said. I need to face what happened instead of just being afraid of fragments and nightmares. Maybe if I see it in daylight, with you beside me, it won't have so much power. They rode out together, taking it slow, following the path Elena must have walked that terrible night 7 years ago. When they reached the riverbank, calm now, deceptively peaceful in the morning light, Elena dismounted and stood staring at the water. I can't remember it clearly, she said. Just impressions. Cold, dark, the current pulling me under, fighting to breathe, and then nothing for such a long time. Ethan stood beside her, close enough to offer support, but giving her space to process. You don't have to remember it all. Sometimes it's better to let the details stay buried. But they're not buried, are they? They're there, shaping my nightmares, controlling my fears. I just can't see them clearly enough to fight them. She knelt down and touched the water, her hand trembling. The river took everything from me. My life, my memories, my time with my son. I should hate it. Do you? Elena was quiet for a long moment, her fingers trailing through the current. No, she said finally. I'm afraid of it, but I don't hate it. It was just water doing what water does. I was the one foolish enough to try to cross it in a storm. You weren't foolish, you were trying to reach me. I know, you told me that, but I still can't remember why it was so urgent. She stood, wiping her wet hand on her skirt. Maybe I never will. Maybe some things are just lost forever. They stood together on the riverbank, and Ethan found himself thinking about all the things that had been lost, years, memories, the easy certainty of their early marriage. But they'd gained things too, a deeper understanding of fragility and strength, an appreciation for each moment they had together, a determination to build something new rather than just mourn what was gone. I love you, Elena said suddenly, her eyes still on the water. I don't remember falling in love with you. I don't remember our wedding or our honeymoon or probably 1,000 other moments that mattered. But I know I love you now. Is that enough? Ethan's throat tightened with emotion. It's more than enough. She turned to face him, and her expression was vulnerable but determined. Then maybe we could try. Not to recreate what we had, but to build something new. To be husband and wife again, in whatever way that looks like for us now. Elena, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. She took his hand. I want to stop being afraid of my own life. I want to be more than just a woman recovering from trauma. I want to be your partner again, in all the ways that means. Ethan pulled her close, holding her against his heart. We'll take it slow as you need. I know, she said, but I'm ready to try. And standing there by the river that had taken so much but failed to take everything, Ethan and Elena began the slow work of rebuilding not just her memory, but their marriage, their partnership, their life together. It wouldn't be easy. There would be more nightmares, more setbacks, more moments of fear and confusion. But there would also be progress, healing, and the quiet joy of discovering each other again. The river had tried to destroy them. Instead, it had simply changed them, forging something stronger from the broken pieces. And that, Ethan thought, was its own kind of miracle. The winter came early that year, bringing with it the kind of cold that settled deep into bones and made the ranch hands huddle closer to the bunkhouse stove. Elena stood at the kitchen window watching snow fall in thick, lazy flakes, and for the first time since her return, the sight didn't trigger panic or confusion. It was just snow, beautiful and peaceful, blanketing the world in quiet white. Ma, come look! Luke's voice rang out from the parlor, excited and urgent in the way only an 8-year-old could manage. I finished the drawing! Elena turned from the window, a smile touching her lips. The smile came more easily now, 6 months after the court hearing, 6 months of slow and painful progress that had gradually transformed her from a frightened, broken woman into someone who was learning to inhabit her own life again. She found Luke sprawled on the floor, papers scattered around him, holding up a carefully rendered sketch of the ranch house. The perspective was slightly off and the proportions weren't quite right, but the love in every line was unmistakable. It's beautiful, Elena said, kneeling beside him. You've been practicing. Mr. Henderson at the general store gave me new pencils, the good kind from back east. Luke's face glowed with pride. I want to draw everything, Ma, the whole ranch, every building and every horse, so we'll always remember it exactly as it is. The casual mention of memory, something he'd been so careful to avoid in the early months, showed how far they'd all come. Luke no longer tiptoed around his mother's damaged recollection, no longer feared that mentioning the past would shatter her fragile present. He'd learned that she was stronger than she looked, that setbacks were part of the journey, not the end of it. That's a wonderful project, Elena said, ruffling his hair. Can I help? You could tell me stories about the ranch from before, from when you... He paused, then pushed forward. From before the river. Things I was too little to remember. It was a test, gentle but deliberate. Luke had started doing this lately, asking questions that required Elena to reach into the murky depths of her damaged memory and pull out specific details. Sometimes she could, sometimes she couldn't, but he'd learned to accept both outcomes with equal grace. Elena settled onto the floor beside her son, thinking. Before the river, she said slowly, your father and I used to sit on the porch every evening after the work was done. We'd watch the sun set and plan improvements to the ranch. He'd talk about expanding the herds, and I'd argue that we needed better infrastructure first. Did you fight a lot? Luke asked, sketching as she talked. Not fight exactly, more like passionate discussions. A memory surfaced, clearer than most. Once we argued for 2 hours about whether to invest in new breeding stock or repair the north barn. I won that argument. The barn got fixed, and 3 months later a storm would have destroyed it if we hadn't reinforced the roof. Father says you were always right about the practical stuff. Not always, Elena corrected, but often enough that he learned to listen. She told him more stories as the afternoon wore on, some pulled from genuine memory, others reconstructed from things Ethan had told her and details she'd pieced together. The line between remembered and learned had blurred over the months, and Elena had made peace with that. It didn't matter if a memory was original or rebuilt. What mattered was the truth of the experience, the emotional reality beneath the facts. When Ethan came in from the cold several hours later, stamping snow from his boots, he found them still there, surrounded by drawings and lost in conversation. Something in his expression softened when he saw them, a look Elena had learned to recognize. It was relief mixed with wonder, the constant surprise that she was here, that they were a family again, however imperfectly. "Storm's getting worse," Ethan said, crossing to warm his hands by the fire. "Tom's got the hands securing the stock. We might be snowed in for a few days." "Good," Elena said, rising from the floor. "Then you'll have no excuse to avoid that desk work you've been putting off." Ethan grimaced. "I was hoping you'd forgotten about the ledgers." "I never forget the ledgers," Elena replied, and there was a teasing quality to her voice that still surprised her when she heard it. This lightness, this ability to joke and banter, it had returned gradually over the months, emerging like spring flowers through melting snow. That evening, after Luke had been coaxed into bed and Maria had retired to her own quarters, Elena and Ethan sat together in the study. The ledgers were spread before them, numbers marching in neat columns, but neither was particularly focused on the work. Outside, the wind howled, driving snow against the windows with insistent fury. "This is how it was that night," Elena said quietly, her eyes on the storm. "The night I went into the river. Wind and rain so thick you couldn't see 3 feet in front of you." Ethan's hand stilled on the page. They didn't talk about that night often. The memories were too painful, too fraught with guilt and loss. But lately, Elena had started bringing it up more frequently, as if by examining it in the light, she could rob it of its power to haunt her dreams. "I've been remembering more," she continued. "Little pieces, but they're clearer than before. I remember being in the house, watching the storm, feeling agitated, anxious about something." "Do you remember what?" "No, that part's still blank." Her brow furrowed with concentration. "But I remember deciding I had to find you, had to reach you before something. And I remember thinking I could make it if I was careful, if I stayed to the high ground." "The river wasn't supposed to rise that fast," Ethan said, guilt thick in his voice. "I checked it that morning. The water was high but not dangerous. But storms in the mountains can change everything in minutes. You taught me that." Elena turned to look at him. "It wasn't your fault, Ethan. It wasn't anyone's fault. It was just bad timing and worse luck. If I'd been at the house instead of the north pasture, then maybe we both would have drowned trying to cross, or maybe nothing would have changed. You can't build a life on what-ifs." She said it with the certainty of someone who'd learned the lesson through painful experience. "I did that for months after I started remembering, tortured myself with all the ways it could have been different. It doesn't help. It doesn't change anything." Ethan reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. The gesture had become natural over the months, this casual intimacy that spoke of comfort and trust. They'd been rebuilding their physical relationship as carefully as they'd rebuilt everything else. Slowly, with constant communication, respecting Elena's boundaries while gradually expanding them. "You're right," he said. "I know you're right. But sometimes the guilt—" "I know," Elena interrupted softly. "I carry my own guilt. For not being stronger. For not fighting harder to find my way back. For all the years Luke grew up without his mother. But Doc Pritchard says guilt is just another kind of weight we choose to carry. And we can choose to put it down." "Is that what you've done? Put it down?" Elena considered this. "I'm trying. Some days are easier than others, but yes, I'm trying to focus on what we have now rather than what we lost then." The fire crackled in the silence that followed, and outside the storm continued its assault on the ranch. But inside, in the circle of lamplight and warmth, there was peace. It was a hard-won peace, built on months of therapy with Doc Pritchard, countless difficult conversations, and the slow rebuilding of trust and intimacy. But it was real, and it was theirs. "I want to do something," Elena said suddenly. "Something symbolic, maybe, but important to me." "What's that?" She stood, crossing to the desk drawer where she'd stored the cloth doll that had been her constant companion in the dark months of her brokenness. She held it now, looking at its worn fabric and faded features with something like tenderness. "This doll was all I had when I had nothing else. I don't even know where I got it, whether I made it or found it, or someone gave it to me during those lost years, but it kept me anchored when I couldn't remember my own name. She turned the doll over in her hands. I don't need it anymore. I have real things to hold on to now, real people who anchor me. What do you want to do with it? Give it to Luke. Not as a toy, but as a reminder that even in the darkest times, even when everything seems lost, you can find something to hold on to, and that broken things can heal. Ethan's throat tightened with emotion. He'd treasure that. I know, Elena smiled. He treasures everything connected to this family. Sometimes I think he's afraid that if he doesn't hold on tight enough, it'll all disappear again. Can you blame him? No, I feel the same way sometimes. She set the doll down gently. But we're teaching him, and ourselves, that healing isn't about holding on so tight nothing can escape. It's about building something strong enough to weather the storms. The conversation drifted to other topics: ranch business, Luke's education, plans for the spring planting. But the intimacy remained, this comfortable partnership that had slowly re-emerged between them. They were finding their rhythm again, learning how to be husband and wife in this new configuration, and while it wasn't the same as before, it was good in its own right. When they finally climbed the stairs to bed, still in separate rooms, but that boundary had become more about practical sleep than emotional distance, Elena paused outside Ethan's door. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For not giving up. For fighting the county, for sitting with me through the nightmares, for being patient when I couldn't remember our anniversary or the name of our first horse or what I'd said to you the morning before the flood, for loving me even when I couldn't fully love you back. Elena, let me finish. She stepped closer. I know I'm not the wife you married. That woman is gone, or at least so changed that she might as well be someone new. But you've loved me anyway, this broken, rebuilding version of me. That's a gift I can never fully repay. Ethan cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. You don't owe me anything. We're building this together, remember? Both of us changed by what happened, both of us learning who we are now. She leaned into his touch, then rose on her toes to kiss him. It was soft and sweet and filled with promise. Not the passionate fire of new love, but something deeper and more enduring. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright. I'm ready, she said. To stop sleeping in separate rooms. To be your wife in all the ways that means, if you still want that. Ethan's voice broke. Elena, I've wanted that since the moment you said you'd try, but I didn't want to rush you. I know. That's why I love you. She took his hand. I'm not saying it'll be perfect. I might have nightmares, might panic, might need to stop and breathe through the fear, but I'm ready to try. With you. Tonight. What happened next was tender and careful and occasionally awkward, as reconnecting after so much loss always is. But it was also healing, this reclaiming of intimacy, this physical manifestation of all the emotional rebuilding they'd been doing. And when Elena finally fell asleep in Ethan's arms, for the first time in 7 years sharing his bed, she slept through the night without nightmares. The winter storm lasted 3 days, and when it finally cleared, the ranch was transformed. Snow lay thick across the fields, pristine and unmarked except for the paths the hands had cleared to the barn and bunkhouse. Ethan stood on the porch with his morning coffee, watching Luke and Elena build a snowman in the yard, their laughter carrying clear in the cold air. Maria joined him, her own coffee steaming in the frigid morning. She is better, yes? The housekeeper said, not quite a question. Yes, Ethan agreed. Much better. Still, she has the hard moments. I hear her sometimes, in the night, crying. The crying's different now, Ethan said. Not panic or terror, but grief. She's finally letting herself mourn all the years she lost. Doc Pritchard says that's healthy, necessary even. Maria nodded wisely. Grief must come out, or it poisons from inside. Senora Elena, she is strong. She will heal all the way, I think. I hope so. They watched in comfortable silence as Elena showed Luke how to pack snow properly for the snowman's middle section, a skill she'd somehow retained despite losing so many others. The boy followed her instructions carefully, his young face serious with concentration. "You are happy, senor?" Maria asked. "Truly happy?" Ethan considered the question. Was he happy? The words seemed too simple for the complex mix of emotions he carried. Relief and joy tangled with lingering guilt and fear, love mixed with uncertainty about what tomorrow might bring. But underneath it all, yes, there was happiness. The bone-deep contentment of having his family restored, however imperfectly. "Yes," he said finally. "Truly happy." Maria smiled and patted his arm, then headed back inside to start breakfast. Ethan remained on the porch, watching his wife and son play in the snow, and let himself feel the full weight of gratitude for this second chance. The town's full acceptance came gradually, in small gestures and quiet acknowledgments. Sarah Henderson from the general store started setting aside fabric she thought Elena might like, the way she used to before the flood. Reverend Thomas stopped by to invite the family to Sunday service, treating Elena with the casual familiarity of an old acquaintance rather than the careful distance of someone dealing with an invalid. Even Samuel Pierce, who'd been so skeptical during the court proceedings, eventually unbent enough to tip his hat when they passed on the street. But the real test came when Elena decided she wanted to accompany Ethan into town for the monthly Cattlemen's Association meeting. It was the first time she'd volunteered to be in a public setting since the court hearing, and Ethan could see the nervousness in the set of her shoulders as they drove the wagon into Dry Creek Valley. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "If it's too much—" "It's not too much," Elena interrupted. "I'm tired of hiding at the ranch like I'm ashamed of what happened to me. I'm Elena Hale. I own half that ranch. I have every right to attend these meetings." The meeting was held in the back room of the Lucky Dollar Saloon, and when Elena walked in at Ethan's side, conversation stuttered to a halt. Every rancher in the room turned to stare, their expressions ranging from curiosity to discomfort to outright shock. Elena held her head high, met their gazes directly, and waited. It was Tom Yates who broke the tension. "Mrs. Hale," he said, standing and pulling out a chair. "Good to have you here. We could use your head for figures when we start talking about the spring cattle prices." His casual acceptance, his refusal to treat her as anything other than the competent ranch partner she'd once been, set the tone. The other ranchers slowly relaxed, returning to their seats, and if their greetings were more reserved than they might have been, they were at least polite. The meeting proceeded, and Elena listened carefully to the discussions about market trends and transportation costs and the new railroad spur being planned through the territory. When the conversation turned to a complicated pricing structure one of the ranchers was proposing, she spoke up for the first time. "That won't work," she said clearly. "You're not accounting for the seasonal variation in demand. By the time your cattle reach market in October, prices will have dropped at least 15% from the spring peak. You'd be better off contracting forward at a fixed price now, even if it means accepting slightly less than optimal returns." The rancher who'd made the proposal stared at her, then looked down at his figures. Slowly, his expression shifted from skepticism to reluctant agreement. "She's right," he admitted. "I hadn't considered the timing." The rest of the meeting took on a different character after that. The ranchers started directing questions to Elena, asking her opinion on various proposals, treating her as the knowledgeable partner she was, rather than the broken invalid they'd expected. And Elena rose to the challenge, her mind sharp and clear despite the gaps in her memory, proving that whatever the river had taken from her, it hadn't taken her intelligence or her business acumen. When they left the saloon 2 hours later, Elena's eyes were bright with triumph. "Did you see their faces?" she asked as they climbed into the wagon. "When they realized I actually knew what I was talking about?" "I saw," Ethan said, pride evident in his voice. "You were magnificent." "I was terrified," Elena admitted, "but I did it anyway, and it felt like reclaiming a piece of myself." The drive home was quiet, both of them processing what had happened. Elena had proven herself to the town, had shown them she was more than just a victim of tragedy or a woman with a damaged mind. She was Elena Hale, ranch owner and businesswoman, and she demanded to be treated as such. Spring came late but dramatic, transforming the snow-covered landscape into a riot of green almost overnight. Elena worked with the quarter horses, implementing the breeding program she'd designed over the winter months. Her instinct for bloodlines proved as sharp as Tom had predicted, and the foals that arrived in May were strong and well-formed, promising excellent returns in the years to come. Luke turned 9 in April, and Elena threw him a party, the first real celebration the ranch had seen in years. She invited his school friends and their families, baked a cake that only burned slightly on one side, and decorated the house with such enthusiasm that Maria had to gently suggest perhaps fewer ribbons would be more elegant. The party was chaotic and loud and perfect, and Luke's face glowed with happiness as he blew out his candles and made a wish he refused to share. Later, after the guests had left and Luke had gone to bed, Elena and Ethan sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. The evening was warm, carrying the scent of new grass and apple blossoms from the small orchard Elena had started tending. "He wished for the same thing he's wished for every year since I came back," Elena said suddenly. "What's that?" "For things to stay good, for our family to be whole and happy and together." She leaned against Ethan's shoulder. "He told me once when he thought I was asleep. He's afraid that one morning he'll wake up and it'll all have been a dream, that I'll be gone again, and you'll be sad again, and everything will go back to the way it was." "We should talk to him about that," Ethan said, concerned. "We should. But I also understand it. I'm afraid of the same thing sometimes, that I'll wake up and be back on that riverbank, lost and broken, and all of this will have been a beautiful dream my damaged mind created." "But you don't wake up on the riverbank," Ethan pointed out. "You wake up here, in our bed, safe and whole." "Whole is a strong word," Elena said with a wry smile. "But getting closer, yes." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, cattle lowing in the distance, horses moving in the corral, the soft rustle of wind through the cottonwoods. This was home, solid and real and theirs. "I've been thinking," Elena said eventually, "about the thing I was trying to tell you that night. The urgent message that drove me into the storm." "Elena, you don't have to. I think I know what it was." She sat up, turning to face him. "I've been having these flashes, fragments of memory from that day. And I'm almost certain, I was coming to tell you I was pregnant again." Ethan's breath caught. "Pregnant? It makes sense. I was late, had been feeling ill in the mornings, and I remember the feeling of wanting to share news, important news, that couldn't wait." Her voice dropped. "I lost the baby in the river, or in the aftermath. I don't remember, but I must have. There was no pregnancy when I finally surfaced from the fog." The revelation settled over them, heavy with grief for a loss they'd never known to mourn. Another cost of the flood, another piece of their family swept away by the current. "I'm sorry," Ethan said, pulling her close. "I'm so sorry, Elena." "I know, me too." She was quiet against his chest, then added, "But we're still young enough. If we wanted to try again." "Is that what you want?" Elena pulled back to look at him, her expression thoughtful. "I think so. Not right now, not until I'm stronger and more stable. But someday, yes. I'd like to give Luke a sibling, to create something new rather than just trying to recover what was lost." "Then someday," Ethan agreed, "when you're ready, when we're ready." The summer brought its own rhythms and challenges. The quarter horse breeding program proved even more successful than anticipated, with several ranchers from neighboring counties making inquiries about future foals. Elena handled the business side with growing confidence, negotiating contracts and managing accounts with the same skills she'd once brought to the cattle operation. Her nightmares had diminished to occasional occurrences rather than nightly terrors, and when they did strike, she'd learned techniques to ground herself quickly. Doc Pritchard continued his monthly visits, monitoring her progress and offering strategies for managing the remaining gaps in her memory. "You've made remarkable progress," he told her during a July examination. "The brain is an amazing organ. It's been rebuilding pathways, creating new connections to route around the damaged areas. You'll probably never recover all the memories you lost, but you've adapted in ways that allow you to function fully despite those gaps." "So I'm healed?" Elena asked. Pritchard smiled. "You're healing. That's not quite the same thing, but it's more realistic. Trauma of this magnitude doesn't have a finish line where you can say, done, completely recovered. It's more like you learn to live with the scars. They become part of who you are, rather than the defining feature of your existence. It was wisdom Elena had already learned through lived experience, but hearing it validated by a medical professional gave her a sense of peace. She wasn't broken anymore. She was scarred, yes, but scars were proof of survival, evidence of battles fought and won. As autumn approached and the ranch prepared for the fall roundup, Elena made a decision. She called a family meeting, her, Ethan, and Luke, and laid out her proposal. "I want to ride into town," she said. "All three of us, together, on Sunday. I want to attend church service and then walk down Main Street and be seen, not as the broken woman who was rescued, but as a family. As the Hales." Luke's face lit up immediately. "Like we used to, before?" "Like we should now," Elena corrected gently. "Not trying to recreate the past, but building our present. Showing the town that we're not hiding or ashamed, that we've survived and healed and we're here to stay." Ethan studied her face, looking for any sign of doubt or fear. "Are you certain? It'll draw attention." "I'm counting on it," Elena said firmly. "It's time, Ethan. Time to stop living in the shadow of what happened and step fully into who we are now." The following Sunday dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect autumn day that made the whole territory glow gold and crimson. Elena dressed in her best dress, one Maria had helped her make, fitted to her current frame rather than altered from clothes that had belonged to her former self. Luke wore his church suit with the careful pride of a boy who understood the significance of the occasion. And Ethan put on the same suit he'd worn to the court hearing, as if armor against whatever judgment they might face. They rode into Dry Creek Valley in the full light of morning, arriving at the church just as services were about to begin. Every head turned when they entered, and the sanctuary fell silent except for the organ music that faltered for a moment before resuming. Elena walked down the aisle with her head high, Luke's hand in hers, and Ethan at her other side. They took their seats in the third pew, where the Hales had always sat, back when Elena was a regular presence at Sunday services, and waited for the service to begin. Reverend Thomas recovered his composure quickly, offering them a warm smile from the pulpit before launching into his sermon. The congregation gradually returned their attention forward, though Elena could feel their awareness like a physical pressure. They were being watched, evaluated, judged, and she refused to care. The sermon was about second chances and redemption, about the possibility of restoration after loss. Elena wondered if the Reverend had chosen the topic deliberately, but decided it didn't matter. The message resonated regardless of the motivation. When the service ended and people began filing out, the Hales remained seated, letting the crowd thin rather than fighting through it. Finally, when only a few stragglers remained, they stood and made their way to the door where Reverend Thomas was greeting parishioners. "Mrs. Hale," he said, taking her hand warmly, "it's wonderful to see you here. We've missed you these many years." "Thank you, Reverend. It's good to be back." "And young Luke, how you've grown." Thomas shook the boy's hand solemnly. "Your mother tells me you're quite the artist now." Luke beamed. "I've been drawing the ranch, all of it. I'd be honored to see your work sometime." They talked for a few more minutes, the Reverend's easy acceptance setting a tone that others seemed willing to follow. Sarah Henderson approached next, her usually sharp features soft with genuine warmth. "Elena, I'm so glad you've come. I've been wanting to invite you to our quilting circle, but I wasn't sure if you'd remember how." Elena smiled. "I don't remember much from before, Mrs. Henderson, but Maria's been teaching me, and my hands seem to remember even when my mind doesn't. I'd love to join you." "Wonderful. We meet every Tuesday afternoon at my house. Please do come." One by one, the townspeople approached, some curious, some sympathetic, some simply accepting. Not everyone was warm. Elena caught the skeptical looks from Samuel Pierce and his circle, the whispered conversations that stopped when she drew near. But the hostility that had characterized the court proceedings was gone, replaced by something closer to wary acceptance. After the church crowd had dispersed, Elena insisted they walk down Main Street, the same street where Luke had first recognized her all those months ago. The Sunday shoppers and strollers parted for them, some calling greetings, others simply nodding acknowledgement. Elena walked with her husband on one side and her son on the other, and she felt something inside her that had been clenched tight for so long finally begin to relax. They stopped at Henderson's general store, where Elena picked out fabric for a new dress, and Luke got his long-delayed peppermint sticks. They visited the feed store to discuss the fall seed order. They even paused outside the old trading post where Elena had sat broken and lost what seemed like a lifetime ago. "That's where I found you," Luke said quietly, looking at the spot. "You were right there, humming and holding your doll." "I remember," Elena said. "Or at least, I remember being told about it. The actual memory is hazy." "Are you sad about that? Not remembering clearly?" Elena knelt down to her son's level, looking him in the eyes. "Sometimes. But mostly I'm just grateful for what came after. For you recognizing me even when I couldn't recognize myself. For your father fighting to keep me. For the chance to build a life with you both." Luke threw his arms around her neck, and Elena held him tight, not caring that people were watching, that they were the center of attention on a public street. Let them watch. Let them see that the Hale family had survived, had healed, had emerged from tragedy stronger and more united than before. When they finally returned to the wagon for the ride home, Elena felt lighter than she had in months, maybe years, if she counted the time she couldn't remember. The town had seen them, had acknowledged them, and while not everyone was happy about it, while some would probably never accept that the broken beggar had truly been Elena Hale, it no longer mattered. They'd claimed their place, refused to be invisible, and that was enough. That evening, as the sun set over the ranch in brilliant shades of orange and red, Elena did something she'd been building toward for weeks. She called Luke into the parlor, where Ethan was already waiting, and held out the cloth doll that had been her lifeline through the darkest times. "I want you to have this," she told her son. Luke took the doll carefully, reverently, as if it might break. "But Ma, this is yours. You always keep it with you." "I did," Elena agreed. "When I couldn't remember who I was or where I belonged, this doll was the only constant thing in my life. It kept me anchored when everything else was chaos." She smiled. "But I don't need it anymore. I have real anchors now. You and your father, this ranch, the life we're building together. Then why give it to me? Because I want you to have something that represents survival. Something that proves, even when everything seems broken beyond repair, healing is possible." Elena's voice was gentle but firm. "You've been so afraid that I'll disappear again, that our family will fall apart. This doll is proof that even broken things can be mended. Keep it, and remember that we're stronger than we look." Luke clutched the doll to his chest, tears streaming down his face. "I won't let anything happen to it. I promise." "I know you won't." Elena pulled him into a hug, and Ethan wrapped his arms around both of them. The three of them held together in the fading light. Later, after Luke had gone to bed with the doll carefully placed on his shelf among his most treasured possessions, Elena and Ethan stood together on the porch. The same porch where they'd stood countless times before, through seasons of grief and recovery, fear and hope. "Do you remember what you said to me?" Elena asked. "That first night after the court hearing when I asked what you wanted to happen next." "I said we'd start fresh, build something new rather than trying to recreate what was lost." "We've done that," Elena said. "Maybe not perfectly, maybe not the way either of us imagined, but we've done it. We're not the people we were before the river. We're different now, changed by what happened. But we're together, we're whole, and that's enough." Ethan pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. "It's more than enough. It's everything." They stood there as darkness fell completely, and the stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had watched over the ranch through 7 years of separation and months of painful reunion. The river that had tried to destroy them flowed on in the distance, indifferent to their survival. But they had survived. They'd faced the darkness and fought their way back to each other, and in doing so, had forged something stronger than what they'd lost. Elena Hale was no longer the invisible woman on the corner, broken and forgotten. She was seen, acknowledged, claiming her place in the world with courage and determination. The scars remained, in her memory, in her occasional nightmares, in the gaps that would never fully close. But scars were just proof of battles survived, evidence of strength rather than weakness. And as she stood in her husband's arms, looking out over the ranch that was their home and their legacy, Elena understood that healing wasn't about becoming who you were before trauma struck. It was about accepting who you'd become because of it, integrating the broken pieces into something new and whole and entirely your own. The river had taken much from them, but it had failed to take everything. And what remained? This hard-won peace, this rebuilt family, this love that had survived separation and trauma and doubt was worth more than anything the current could have swept away. They were the Hales. They had survived. And they would continue to survive, together, for all the days to come. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of autumn and the promise of winter ahead, and Elena smiled. Whatever challenges the future held, whatever setbacks or struggles might arise, they would face them as they'd faced everything else, together, with patience and love and the unshakable certainty that they belonged to each other. The frozen life Ethan had built in grief's aftermath was gone, melted away by the warmth of reunion and recovery. In its place was something messier and more complicated, but infinitely more real. A life built not on the ashes of loss, but on the foundation of survival and second chances. And as the last light faded from the sky and the ranch settled into the peaceful rhythms of evening, Elena and Ethan turned together and walked into their home, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring, knowing that the hardest battles were behind them and the future, imperfect but full of possibility, lay ahead. The story that had begun with a whispered recognition on a dusty street had become something larger than either of them could have imagined. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the power of love to transcend time and trauma, and the possibility of redemption even when all hope seemed lost. And somewhere in the house, in a small boy's room, a cloth doll sat on a shelf, silent witness to the impossible journey from broken to whole, from invisible to seen, from lost to found. The river had tried to write the ending to their story, but Elena and Ethan had seized the pen and written their own conclusion instead, one where love conquered loss and family proved stronger than tragedy. And they lived, not happily ever after in the fairy tale sense, but happily enough in the real and messy and beautiful way that matters most, together, healing, whole,